Her future in-laws laughed when my sister introduced me. She works as a housekeeper, my sister said. The groom grinned and adjusted his custom silk tie. At least she knows her place, he said. I did not correct them. I waited until the hotel general manager arrived flanked by security. He bypassed the groom, bowed to me, and said the owner is here. Then everyone turned toward me. Before I explain how I used Wall Street regulations to crush his arrogant world, let me know where you are, watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you love seeing toxic people destroyed by their own greed. The lobby of the hotel gleamed under tiered crystal chandeliers. I knelt on the cold, imported marble, wearing a drab gray housekeeping uniform, scrubbing a champagne spill near the grand staircase. Hidden beneath my pinned hair, a wireless earpiece fed me livestock valuations for my impending initial public offering. Tomorrow morning, the market would open and my real estate portfolio would transition into a publicly traded empire. Today, I needed to ensure the ground-level operations of my flagship property remained flawless. Footsteps echoed across the polished floor. My sister Vanessa arrived flanked by her fiancé, Marcus. Marcus operated as a senior investment banker. He possessed an Ivy League pedigree, a sharp intellect, and a deep sense of entitlement. He did not watch where he was walking. The sole of his bespoke leather loafer stepped directly into the puddle I was cleaning. Marcus stopped and sighed. He grabbed a clean linen napkin from my utility cart and wiped a faint smudge from his shoes. He tossed the soiled napkin back onto my tray. This is the sloppy accounting of the working class, he muttered, refusing to make eye contact with me. They leave messes for the rest of us to step around. Vanessa linked her arm through his. She looked down at me, her lips curling into a practiced, condescending smile. Marcus, this is my older sister, Harper, she said. She works as a housekeeper. Marcus let out a short, breathy laugh. He finally looked at me, taking in the gray uniform and the damp sponge in my hand. It is good to have realistic expectations, he said. At least she knows her place. I did not flush with anger. I kept my breathing even and placed the sponge on the cart. A childhood spent scrubbing floors while my parents funneled our savings into beauty pageants for Vanessa taught me the value of silence. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my apron. Before Vanessa could offer another backhanded compliment, the brass doors of the private executive elevator chimed open. Silas, the general manager of the property, stepped out. 4 men in dark suits walked behind him, forming a tight security perimeter. Silas bypassed the wealthy guests mingling near the reception desk. He walked directly toward our group. Marcus stood taller, adjusting his suit jacket, preparing to receive a premium greeting from the hotel management. Silas did not even look at him. The general manager stopped in front of my cleaning cart and bowed his head. He held out a thick, leather-bound portfolio embossed with gold lettering. "Good afternoon, Madam Chairman Silas," said his voice, echoing in the quiet lobby. "The quarterly executive financial reports are ready for your signature." Marcus froze. The superiority vanished from his features. He stared at the leather portfolio and then looked back at my drab gray uniform, his mind struggling to reconcile the conflicting data. Vanessa stood paralyzed, her manicured hands gripping her designer clutch. I took the portfolio from Silas. "Thank you," I said. "Have the board wait in the penthouse. I will join them shortly." Silas nodded and stepped back. I turned my attention back to Marcus. The brilliant investment banker realized he had just insulted the owner of the building he intended to marry in. A rational man would apologize. Marcus was an apex predator of the financial sector. When backed into a corner, he did not seek forgiveness. He sought leverage. The shock receded from his face, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. "An undercover boss routine is a neat trick," Marcus said. But a secret billionaire playing Maid right before her company goes public signals instability. If the Wall Street Journal receives an anonymous tip about fabricated compliance violations or pending environmental lawsuits from disgruntled employees, your stock price will plummet before the opening bell. Investors hate scandal. He stepped back, crossing his arms over his tailored chest. "You are going to waive the $200,000 invoice for our wedding ceremony," he demanded. You are going to comp the bridal suites and the catering? If you refuse, I will leak the fake lawsuits and tank your initial public offering. I looked at the man standing in my lobby, attempting to hold my billion-dollar initial public offering hostage over a catering bill. A novice would have called the security detail and ordered him physically removed from the premises. A foolish executive would have risked a public altercation and the resulting media spectacle just days before the opening bell. I understood the mechanics of corporate warfare far better than Marcus realized. Keeping a predator outside the walls allows them to strike unpredictably from the shadows. Inviting them inside gives you control over the locks and the architecture of their downfall. I offered a slow, measured nod, keeping my facial expression devoid of any emotion. I told Marcus the entire wedding invoice would be zeroed out by the end of the hour. His chest puffed out beneath the tailored fabric of his suit. He adjusted his silk tie, savoring the perceived victory. He believed he had just intimidated a weak target, using nothing but a fabricated public relations threat. Marcus took Vanessa by the elbow and guided her toward the revolving glass doors, leaving me standing beside my housekeeping cart. I watched my sister walk away, her designer heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble. That sharp sound triggered a vivid memory, transporting me back to a humid summer evening nearly 2 decades ago. I was 16 years old, kneeling on the worn linoleum of our family kitchen, holding a stiff, bristled scrub brush. The harsh smell of industrial bleach burned my throat and stung my eyes. My parents, David and Cynthia, had abruptly fired the household cleaning staff earlier that week. They needed the extra capital to fund a custom-imported silk pageant gown for Vanessa. I was drafted to replace the maids. I remember scrubbing a stubborn scuff mark when my mother walked into the kitchen holding a crystal glass of white wine. She did not offer to help. She looked down at my raw, blistered hands and delivered a lesson I never forgot. "Some girls are born to shine. Harper," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "Others are born to clean." That moment severed any lingering illusion of familial loyalty. It eradicated my need for their approval and forged my armor. It taught me that blood was a useless currency, and financial independence was the only valid metric of survival in this world. I left the cleaning cart with a floor supervisor and walked toward the private executive elevator. I rode the car to the top floor of the hotel. The brass doors parted to reveal an expansive executive suite enclosed by floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the vast Manhattan skyline. I bypassed the plush leather seating area and sat behind a sprawling mahogany desk. I did not bother changing out of the drab gray housekeeping uniform. The coarse fabric served as a constant grounding reminder of the foundation I had built and the invisible power it afforded me. I unlocked my secure terminal and accessed the centralized accounting matrix for the global property. If Marcus possessed the audacity to blackmail me in public, I needed to map his exact financial footprint within my network. I opened the master ledger for the upcoming weekend. The file contained the itemized billing for Vanessa and her groom, covering the grand ballroom, the catering, and the luxury suites. I expected to see a blank balance, waiting for the complimentary authorization I had just promised. Instead, the proprietary billing software displayed a glaring anomaly. Marcus had already submitted a non-refundable deposit of $50,000 to secure the venue 7 days prior. The timeline did not align with his desperate extortion attempt downstairs. A man possessing the liquid capital to casually drop $50,000 on a venue deposit does not risk a federal extortion charge to save the remaining balance. He only issues a threat of that magnitude if his cash flow has suddenly evaporated. I initiated a deep forensic trace on the initial deposit. The encrypted banking software utilized by my hotel strips away standard privacy shields, allowing my Treasury Department to verify the exact origin point of any incoming wire transfer. I followed the digital breadcrumbs backward through the institutional clearinghouses. The routing identifiers did not originate from a personal checking account, a standard joint savings portfolio, or a legitimate corporate bonus payout. The money flowed from an institutional holding account managed by the elite investment bank where Marcus operated as a senior director. I deployed a secondary decryption sequence, probing the specific origin node to ensure the data was accurate. The screen populated with the raw financial routing data. The $50,000 was wired directly from a closed retirement trust belonging to an 82-year-old widow. The chilling reality of the transaction settled over the quiet office. Marcus was not merely an arrogant Wall Street executive demanding free luxury services. He was an active predator. He was utilizing his fiduciary access to siphon capital from vulnerable pensioners to fund his bespoke suits and his high society wedding. He was embezzling from the elderly to maintain the illusion of his elite status. This discovery demanded a calculated, lethal response. Financial crimes of this nature leave indelible digital fingerprints across the banking sector. Marcus assumed the hotel accounting department would simply process the wire transfer and issue a receipt, never questioning the source of the funds. He treated the hospitality industry as a blind receptacle for his laundered money. He failed to account for a chairman who built her empire by dissecting financial ledgers and identifying systemic vulnerabilities. I downloaded the raw routing data, the transaction timestamps, and the client identifiers, saving the compiled evidence to a secure encrypted drive. I had the exact weapon required to dismantle his career, strip him of his licenses, and send him to a federal penitentiary. I reached for the sleek black receiver of my desk phone, preparing to contact my private liaison at the Securities and Exchange Commission. A direct tip from a corporate chairman accompanied by forensic routing data would trigger an immediate, unannounced audit of his brokerage firm. Before I could dial the internal access code, the heavy oak doors of my executive suite burst open. My executive assistant did not have time to announce the intruder. A woman marched into the office, bringing a chaotic storm of heavy perfume and misplaced entitlement. It was Patricia, the mother of the groom. She wore a tailored tweed suit that tried too hard to mimic generational wealth and carried a crocodile skin handbag she gripped like a blunt weapon. She possessed the same manufactured superiority as her son, but lacked his calculated restraint and Ivy League polish. Patricia ignored the stunning panoramic view of the city and marched directly toward my mahogany desk. She looked at my gray housekeeping uniform, her upper lip curling in immediate distaste. She assumed I was a rogue maid who had wandered into the executive suite to steal office supplies. When I remained seated, projecting a calm, unyielding authority, she realized I was the woman Vanessa had mentioned downstairs. She slammed her manicured hands onto the glass surface of my desk. She did not offer a greeting or acknowledge the tension radiating through the room. She launched into a shrill, rapid-fire list of demands. Patricia informed me that she was currently booked in a standard luxury suite on the 14th floor. She found the square footage insulting and the view inadequate for a woman of her social standing. She demanded I surrender the keys to the presidential suite immediately. She expected the sprawling top-floor sanctuary, complete with a private butler, a dining room, and a grand piano to be handed over without a single additional charge to her personal credit card. I placed the phone receiver back onto the cradle. I looked at the furious woman standing before me, her face flushed with unearned indignation. I informed her that the presidential suite was currently vacant, but the nightly rate was $10,000. I told her I would gladly authorize the room upgrade if she provided a valid platinum credit card to cover the incidental hold and the daily tariff. Patricia let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the soundproof windows. She leaned over the desk, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous pitch. She told me she was not going to pay a single dime to stay in my building. She pointed a finger inches from my face and delivered her ultimate threat. If you do not hand over the keycard to that penthouse, right now I will pull out my phone and begin broadcasting live. Patricia threatened, her eyes wide with manic energy. I have a vast network of followers on social media. I will walk down to your crowded lobby and start screaming. I will tell the entire internet that your management staff racially profiled me. I will fabricate a story about your security team physically assaulting an elderly woman of color. I will launch a viral campaign that will paint this hotel as a hotbed of bigotry and elder abuse. By the time your precious stock goes public on Monday morning, the protesters will be marching outside your front doors, blocking your wealthy guests from entering. She stood tall, gripping her crocodile handbag, expecting me to crumble under the weight of a catastrophic public relations nightmare. The irony of the situation was exquisite and profound. The mother was threatening to fabricate a story about elder abuse to secure a free luxury hotel room, while her son was actively draining the retirement accounts of vulnerable seniors to fund the wedding occurring downstairs. Patricia stood in my executive office, waiting for a concession. She gripped her crocodile skin handbag, preparing to launch a fabricated social media war. I looked at the flush skin of her neck and recognized the exact same parasitic entitlement that fueled her son. Arguing with a narcissist is a waste of executive energy. They feed on the emotional reaction of their targets. I opened the top drawer of my mahogany desk and extracted a heavy platinum keycard. I slid it across the glass surface. Patricia snatched the card, her lips curling into a triumphant sneer. She adjusted her tweed jacket, believing she had successfully intimidated a billionaire into submission. She turned on her heel and marched out of the suite, eager to inspect her unearned luxury. I waited for the heavy oak doors to click shut. I picked up my phone and dialed the subterranean security hub. I instructed the chief network engineer to isolate the specific radio frequency identification code embedded in her new keycard. I ordered him to geofence her access parameters. The platinum card would open the heavy double doors to the presidential suite, but it would no longer communicate with the elevator call buttons or the stairwell electronic locks. Patricia wanted the penthouse. Now she was trapped inside it, a prisoner in a gilded luxury cage, unable to disrupt the lobby or harass my staff while I dismantled her son. Marcus presented a far more lethal threat. He was a licensed investment banker operating with stolen pension funds. If he suspected I was tracing his Wall Street routing numbers, he would initiate a data wipe and destroy the digital evidence before Monday morning. I needed to blind him with his own arrogance. I needed a diversion that played directly into his preconceived notions about my intellect. I left my executive suite and rode the elevator down to the grand ballroom where the event planners were finalizing the reception layout. The room was a chaotic symphony of floral arrangements and crystal tableware. Waiters in crisp white jackets polished silver serving trays under the warm glow of the chandeliers. I spotted Marcus standing near the catering station, tasting a sample menu with Vanessa. I walked toward them carrying a printed clipboard. I did not keep my voice low. I projected my words, ensuring the surrounding vendors heard every syllable. I demanded an immediate forensic audit of the catering budget. I pointed at the imported white truffles and the beluga caviar itemized on the ledger. I accused the wedding planner of inflating the profit margins and stated I would scrutinize every single catering invoice before signing a check. I played the role of a petty, stingy sister, complaining about the exorbitant cost of luxury appetizers. Marcus turned away from the tasting table, a look of profound amusement washing over his features. He let out a sharp, patronizing laugh. He looked at my drab gray uniform and shook his head. He assumed my grand threat of a forensic audit earlier in the lobby was nothing more than a trivial dispute over the cost of hors d'oeuvres. He believed I was obsessed with the price of mushrooms and fish eggs. The diversion worked flawlessly. His Ivy League ego refused to entertain the idea that a woman wearing a housekeeping apron could breach institutional banking firewalls. He wrapped an arm around Vanessa and mocked my penny-pinching mindset loud enough for the florist to hear. He felt invincible. His complacency provided the perfect smokescreen for my digital strike. I retreated to the service corridor, leaving them to their laughter. I accessed a secure terminal hidden inside the staff logistics office. Protected by the illusion of a catering dispute, I initiated a direct cyber intrusion into his Wall Street brokerage network. I bypassed the secondary firewalls, using the routing identifiers I secured earlier in the afternoon. The screen illuminated with raw transactional data. I traced the stolen capital through 3 separate offshore clearinghouses. Marcus utilized a technique called layering, attempting to wash the pension money through dormant corporate accounts before routing it to my hotel. It was a sophisticated maneuver designed to outsmart federal regulators. But financial predators always leave patterns. I identified his digital signature across the fragmented ledgers. I mapped the exact trajectory of the embezzled funds, securing the client identifiers and the timestamps. I downloaded the compiled dossier securing the exact proof required to trigger a federal indictment. The digital evidence was locked inside my encrypted drive, waiting for the opening bell. As evening descended over Manhattan, the hotel transitioned into a fortress of high society preparation. The rehearsal dinner commenced in the private dining room on the second floor. I avoided the celebration. I descended into the subterranean wine cellar to conduct a routine inventory audit ahead of the upcoming weekend surge. The cellar was a cavernous climate-controlled vault built beneath the foundation of the hotel. Rows of vintage Bordeaux and rare champagne rested behind wrought iron gates. The air was cool and thick with the scent of aged cork and damp stone. The silence down here was usually pristine. A shadow detached itself from the dim lighting near the central tasting table. Marcus stepped into the narrow aisle blocking my exit. He had left the rehearsal dinner upstairs. He wore a flawless charcoal evening suit, holding a crystal glass of red wine. The amused arrogance he displayed in the ballroom earlier was gone. He looked at me with the cold, calculating stare of a corporate raider preparing to execute a hostile takeover. He took a sip of his wine, savoring the expensive vintage before placing the glass on a wooden barrel. "You think you hold all the leverage because your name is on the deed to this building?" he said, his voice echoing softly against the arched brick ceiling. "You think a little catering dispute proves you are in charge of this situation?" Marcus reached into the breast pocket of his tailored jacket. He extracted a thick folded document printed on heavy legal paper. He held it up, allowing the dim cellar light to illuminate the embossed notary seal at the bottom of the page. He did not come down here to negotiate the cost of the wedding or apologize for his behavior. He came to steal the empire. "This is a sworn legal affidavit," Marcus explained, tapping the thick parchment with his index finger. "It details the precise origin of the seed, capital used to incorporate this hotel limited liability company years ago." He stepped closer, closing the distance between us in the narrow aisles. The physical intimidation was a calculated tactic designed to force a retreat. I stood my ground, keeping my posture rigid and my expression blank. "The signature on the dotted line belongs to David." Your father, Marcus, continued outlining his lethal legal theory. The document contained a fabricated narrative, claiming David provided the initial anonymous funding to launch my real estate portfolio. According to corporate equity laws outlined in the affidavit, that unrecorded financial contribution granted David a 51% controlling interest in the entire enterprise. Marcus smiled a slow, predatory grin that failed to reach his eyes. "My future father-in-law feels very generous today," Marcus stated, his tone dripping with venomous satisfaction. "He recognizes true financial vision when he sees it. He has granted me full power of attorney over his assets and his corporate holdings." He tapped the document against the palm of his hand, weaponizing the fabricated paperwork. "First thing Monday morning, before your initial public offering hits the trading floor, I am filing this document with the state registry," Marcus threatened. "I will secure an emergency injunction to freeze your corporate operating accounts. The court will halt the public offering and transfer the controlling equity directly to my portfolio. You will not ring the opening bell. Harper, I will ring it. I will take this company public and strip away your shares until you are left with nothing but that gray Maid uniform." Marcus stood there breathing the cool, cellar air, convinced he had just delivered an uncrackable legal checkmate. He believed he had cornered a naive owner, using her own family as the ultimate weapon. He planned to reduce me to poverty before the sun rose, orchestrating a hostile takeover from inside my own walls. I did not flinch at the sight of the forged affidavit. I bypassed Marcus in the narrow aisle of the wine cellar, leaving him to savor his imaginary victories. The air grew warmer as I ascended the spiral staircase toward the second-floor VIP lounge. The rehearsal dinner buzzed with the sound of clinking crystal and hollow high society laughter. I spotted my parents sitting in a secluded leather booth, away from the main wedding party. David swirled a glass of expensive bourbon, while Cynthia adjusted a diamond tennis bracelet. They looked entirely comfortable in a luxury ecosystem they did not earn. I walked directly to their table. I did not raise my voice or cause a public scene. I leaned over the mahogany surface and asked David how much it cost to buy his signature. Neither of them displayed a single ounce of shock or guilt. David took a slow sip of his bourbon, his eyes scanning my drab gray housekeeping uniform with practiced disdain. He set the glass down and folded his hands upon the table. He admitted to signing the legal document without hesitation. Cynthia chimed in, defending the treason with twisted maternal logic. She explained that Marcus had guaranteed them a $10 million payout the moment the hotel transitioned into his portfolio. They rationalized the betrayal by claiming Vanessa required a royal lifestyle to maintain her influencer brand while I was already accustomed to hard labor. They were willing to sell my billion-dollar empire for a fraction of its worth just to fund my sister and her vanity. The sheer audacity of their greed was staggering, but it did not break my composure. I did not shed a tear. The young girl who wept on the kitchen floor 2 decades ago was dead. In her place stood a corporate chairman immune to the weaponized guilt of toxic parents. I reached into the deep pocket of my apron and extracted a sleek, encrypted tablet. I placed the device on the table between their expensive drinks. I tapped the biometric scanner bypassing the internal firewalls and opened the original incorporation ledger for the Waldorf Astoria Holding Company. "You assume corporate equity is transferred with a single sheet of notarized paper?" I said, keeping my tone surgical and cold. "You assume a forged signature can rewrite years of audited financial history." I rotated the tablet toward David. The screen displayed the raw metadata of the initial limited liability company formation. The immutable digital ledger recorded every handshake, every bank routing number, and every encrypted wire transfer that funded the seed capital. The data proved unequivocally that every cent originated from my offshore private equity funds. There was zero unrecorded cash. There were no phantom investors. The document Marcus was holding in the cellar was a legal fiction. I watched the arrogant smirk melt from my father's face as he read the undeniable financial timeline. I informed him that presenting a fabricated affidavit to a state registry is not a savvy business move. It constitutes felony perjury. If Marcus attempted to file that document on Monday morning, David would be subpoenaed by federal regulators to testify under oath regarding his phantom financial contributions. I told him he would be facing a decade in a federal penitentiary for conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. Cynthia dropped her hand from her diamond bracelet, her skin turning a sickly shade of pale. They realized their $10 million payout was a mirage designed to trap them in a federal crime. I retrieved my tablet and walked away, leaving them to marinate in the terror of their own making. Marcus did not wait in the cellar. He had followed me upstairs, lurking near the entrance of the VIP lounge. He watched my parents crumble. He saw the encrypted tablet and recognized the failure of his corporate takeover. The realization that he could not steal the hotel intact fractured his Ivy League composure. A rational banker would cut his losses and attempt to negotiate a quiet exit. An apex predator stripped of his leverage resorts to scorched earth tactics. If he could not own the Waldorf Astoria, he would burn its reputation to the ground on the eve of my public offering. Marcus retreated to a quiet balcony overlooking the Manhattan skyline. He pulled out an encrypted burner phone. A man operating in the elite tiers of investment banking cultivates relationships with the darkest corners of the financial sector. He dialed a contact embedded in a shadow market lending firm. He did not need a courtroom to cripple my operations. He weaponized a loophole in the commercial credit system. Marcus instructed his contact to file a fraudulent uniform commercial code lien against the primary operating accounts of my hotel. A UCC lien is a legal claim filed by a creditor indicating that they hold a security interest in the assets of a debtor. When filed electronically, it triggers an immediate automated response from the institutional banking network. It does not require a judge to sign an initial warrant. It acts as a rapid financial tourniquet. Within 20 minutes, my secure tablet vibrated with a priority alert from the hotel treasury department. The automated banking algorithms detected the shadow lien. To mitigate risk, the commercial banks instituted an immediate hard freeze on the Waldorf Astoria operational accounts. The cash flow was severed. The timing was a masterpiece of corporate sabotage. We were less than 12 hours away from hosting 500 of the wealthiest and most influential guests in New York. The logistics of a high society wedding require constant liquid capital. Deliveries of vintage champagne, imported seafood, and exotic floral arrangements were scheduled for the morning. The vendors required certified cashier checks upon delivery. Marcus walked back into the lounge, a dark, vindictive smile returning to his face. He knew the freeze blocked my ability to pay the food and beverage suppliers. He intended to starve the wedding guests, creating a chaotic spectacle of empty tables and dry bars. The sabotage cut much deeper than catering. Tomorrow was Friday. It was the bi-weekly payroll distribution for the entire hotel staff. Hundreds of housekeepers, chefs, valets, and concierges were expecting their wages to clear. A frozen operating account meant every digital payroll transfer would bounce. Marcus planned to incite a catastrophic labor strike right in the middle of the wedding reception. A staff walkout during a flagship event is the ultimate nightmare for a hospitality conglomerate. The wealthy guests would document the chaos on their smartphones. Influencers would broadcast the lack of food and the protesting staff to millions of followers. Financial analysts would view the payroll failure as a severe liquidity crisis. The brand reputation of the Waldorf Astoria would be annihilated. When the stock market opened on Monday morning, the institutional investors would withdraw their commitments, fearing toxic internal management. The environmental, social, and governance rating of my company would plummet due to the labor dispute. My billion-dollar initial public offering would collapse before a single share was traded. Marcus stood near the bar swirling his wine, believing he had engineered the perfect execution. He thought he had severed my lifeline and left me to drown in a sea of bounced checks and angry employees. He smiled at me from across the room, confident that my empire was hours away from total destruction. He failed to understand that a woman who built her fortune from nothing never leaves her survival in the hands of a commercial bank. The morning sun broke over the Manhattan skyline, casting long shadows across the polished marble of the hotel lobby. Marcus sat at the corner table of the mezzanine bar, holding a crystal glass of aged scotch. He had not slept. He spent the night monitoring the commercial banking algorithms, waiting for the fraudulent lien to choke the life out of the Waldorf Astoria. The digital tourniquet was in place. It was 6 a.m. The delivery trucks carrying the imported seafood, the vintage champagne, and the thousands of white orchids were scheduled to arrive at the subterranean loading dock. At the exact same time, the biweekly payroll for 500 hotel employees was programmed to clear their respective checking accounts. Marcus took a slow sip of his drink, watching the main corridor. He anticipated a symphony of chaos. He waited for the delivery drivers to storm out, shouting about bounced cashier checks. He waited for the housekeepers, the valets, and the kitchen staff to drop their tools and stage a walkout. He wanted to watch my empire burn while he sat comfortably sipping top-shelf liquor. I stood near the concierge desk, adjusting the collar of my drab gray uniform. I saw the delivery trucks backing into the loading bays on the security monitors. I heard the low, anxious whispers rippling through the staff as they checked their banking applications on their phones. The digital transfer failed. The panic was real, but the vulnerability was an illusion. A novice real estate developer relies entirely on commercial credit lines and institutional goodwill. A seasoned corporate chairman who grew up scrubbing floors understands that digital numbers on a screen are fragile. Physical currency is undeniable. I tapped my wireless earpiece and opened a secure channel to Vance, my chief security officer. I did not ask for a legal consultation. I instructed him to meet me on the lowest sub-basement level. The foundation of the hotel housed more than just wine cellars and laundry facilities. Behind a biometric steel door lay the emergency cash vault. I designed the contingency plan years ago, anticipating grid failures or sudden financial freezes. The heavy vault door hissed open, revealing rows of stacked canvas duffel bags. Each bag contained sequential, uncirculated $100 bills. Vance and 3 armed guards loaded the heavy bags onto a reinforced utility cart. We took the freight elevator directly to the loading dock. The atmosphere on the concrete dock was hostile. The lead vendor, a burly man supplying the imported caviar, stood with his arms crossed, refusing to let his crew unload a single wooden crate. The executive chef argued with him, holding a tablet displaying the frozen digital payment screen. A crowd of housekeeping staff gathered near the time clock, murmuring about missing rent payments and unpaid wages. The mutiny Marcus had engineered was minutes away from exploding. I pushed through the crowd of angry employees and frustrated vendors. I still wore the gray apron, blending in with my own staff, but the armed security detail flanking me commanded immediate silence. I signaled Vance. He unzipped the first canvas duffel bag and dumped a mountain of banded currency onto the stainless steel receiving table. The arguments ceased. The sight of raw physical capital silenced the loading dock. I addressed the vendors first. I read the exact figures owed to each supplier from memory. I instructed Vance to hand the lead caviar vendor his required payment in cash, plus a 10% inconvenience premium. The vendor counted the crisp bills, his hostility evaporating. He turned and yelled at his crew to start unloading the crates immediately. The remaining suppliers quickly formed a quiet, orderly line. Then I turned to my employees. I looked at the housekeepers, the dishwashers, and the valets. These were the people who formed the actual spine of the hospitality industry. I knew the anxiety of living paycheck to paycheck because I had lived it while my sister paraded in silk gowns. I spoke clearly, ensuring my voice carried over the hum of the idling delivery trucks. I announced that a banking error had temporarily delayed the direct deposits. To compensate for the distress, every single employee clocking in for a shift this weekend would receive their full wages in cash immediately. Furthermore, I was doubling their pay for the next 48 hours. The tension shattered. The murmurs of mutiny transformed into fierce, unshakable loyalty. The housekeepers returned to their carts with renewed dedication. The kitchen staff marched back to their stations. By deploying liquid capital, I did not just solve a temporary liquidity crisis. I cemented an army of devoted workers who would now defend the hotel against any disruption. Upstairs in the mezzanine bar, Marcus checked his expensive wristwatch. It was past 8 in the morning. The grand ballroom should have been empty. The lobby should have been filled with striking workers holding picket signs. Instead, he watched a synchronized ballet of premium hospitality. Waiters carried trays of polished silver. Housekeepers moved with pristine efficiency. The floral arrangements were being assembled by the grand staircase. Marcus stood up, walking to the edge of the glass balcony overlooking the lobby. He saw me walking out of the service corridor, holding my cleaning cart. I looked up and met his gaze. I offered a slow, measured nod. The color drained from his face. His skin took on a sickly ashen hue. The smug satisfaction dissolved into hollow terror. The financial blockade had crumbled. He realized his shadow lender connections were useless against a chairman who operated with limitless cash reserves. The failure of the corporate sabotage backed Marcus into a lethal corner. The stakes extended far beyond a ruined high society wedding. He was out of time. Today was Saturday. Monday morning loomed on the horizon, carrying the weight of a federal indictment. The internal auditors at his elite investment bank were scheduled to conduct a mandatory quarterly review of his client portfolios at the opening bell. Marcus had wired $50,000 to secure the wedding venue, but that was merely the tip of his fraudulent iceberg. To fund Vanessa and her relentless demand for designer fashion, private jet charters, and exclusive jewelry, he had drained a staggering $500,000 from the pension trusts of elderly clients over the past 6 months. He needed $500,000 in liquid cash to replace the stolen funds and balance the ledgers before the auditors arrived. If the books were not balanced by Monday morning, the compliance officers would flag the discrepancy. The Securities and Exchange Commission would be notified. He would be stripped of his licenses and escorted out of his Wall Street office in handcuffs, facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary. He had no assets left to liquidate. He had drained his credit lines. The fraudulent hotel takeover was his final desperate gamble to secure a payout, and it had just died on the loading dock. Panic strips away the polished veneer of the educated elite. Driven by pure survival instinct, Marcus resorted to common thievery. He needed something of immense value to sell on the corporate black market. He set his sights on the most guarded asset inside the Waldorf Astoria. Every premium hospitality brand maintains a proprietary VIP client registry. It is a highly classified, encrypted database containing the personal contact information, travel habits, private preferences, and banking details of billionaires, royalty, and global executives. In the hands of a rival investment bank or a competing luxury conglomerate, that data is worth millions in targeted acquisitions. Marcus retreated to a quiet alcove near the business center. He utilized a sophisticated skimming device he had confiscated from a low-level fraudster years ago. He watched a senior concierge access the staff elevator and recorded the radio frequency signal of the employee keycard. He cloned the signal onto a blank magnetic strip. Armed with the cloned keycard, Marcus bypassed the lobby security perimeter. He rode the private elevator up to the top floor, stepping out into the quiet executive corridor. His tailored suit felt suffocating. His palms were slick with nervous sweat. He pressed the cloned card against the biometric scanner of my executive suite. The light flashed green. The heavy oak doors clicked open. Marcus slipped inside the office, locking the doors behind him. He ignored the panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. He walked straight to the mahogany desk and opened his laptop. He connected a high-speed data cable to the secure network terminal. He intended to download the entire client registry and sell the compiled intelligence to a rival banking firm for a quick $500,000 to save his own life. He thought he was acting as a ghost, slipping through the cracks of my empire. He failed to realize that stepping into the chairman's office without an invitation is the fastest way to trigger a fatal trap. I sat in the subterranean security control room, surrounded by a wall of high-definition monitors. The ambient blue light bathed the concrete walls. Vance stood beside me, his arms crossed over his chest. We did not dispatch guards to intercept the intruder. We watched Monitor 7, which displayed the live infrared feed from my executive suite. The thermal imaging rendered Marcus as a bright orange silhouette moving through the dark office. His heat signature betrayed his panic. The bright crimson blooming across his chest and face indicated an elevated heart rate and frantic breathing. He approached the mahogany desk and opened his laptop, connecting a braided data cable to the secure network terminal. He typed with hurried, uncoordinated keystrokes, attempting to bypass the secondary encryption protocols. He wanted the proprietary client registry. He wanted the names, the private contact numbers, the offshore routing preferences, and the travel habits of every billionaire who frequented the Waldorf Astoria. I had intentionally lowered the firewall on that specific directory 15 minutes prior. Marcus watched the progress bar inch across his screen, believing his Ivy League intellect had cracked my security architecture. He pulled the silver drive from the port, shoved it into his pocket, and slipped out the oak doors. He thought he was a ghost. He was merely a rat navigating a maze I designed. I shifted my attention to Monitor 4, displaying the visual feed from the private cigar lounge on the second floor. The lounge was a sanctuary of dark mahogany, heavy leather armchairs and thick, imported smoke. Marcus walked into the frame. He adjusted his tailored suit, attempting to project an aura of unshakable confidence. He approached a secluded corner booth where an older, distinguished man sat swirling a glass of neat bourbon. The man was the chief executive officer of the elite Wall Street investment bank where Marcus operated. Marcus sat across from his boss and ordered a drink. I turned a dial on the soundboard, amplifying the audio feed hidden within the lounge ceiling fixtures. Marcus leaned forward, placing the silver drive on the table between them. He did not ask for a loan. He pitched a treasonous transaction. He told his boss the drive contained the ultimate hospitality ledger, a pristine database of ultra-high net worth individuals ripe for financial acquisition. Marcus demanded a promotion to vice president and an immediate cash bonus of $500,000 in exchange for the decrypted file. He intended to use the bonus to quietly replace the embezzled pension funds before the Monday morning compliance audit. The air in the security room grew heavy with poetic irony. Marcus smirked, believing he had just orchestrated a brilliant corporate espionage maneuver. He thought he was selling stolen luxury intelligence to a rival entity. He failed to comprehend the true architecture of the financial ecosystem he inhabited. 3 months ago, my private equity firm executed a silent, hostile acquisition of that exact investment bank. I purchased the underwater debt portfolios and consolidated the voting shares through anonymous proxy holding companies. I currently owned 60% of the institution. The chief executive officer sitting across from Marcus did not answer to a board of directors. He answered directly to me. Marcus was sitting in a building I owned, attempting to sell my stolen property to a man who deposited his paychecks from my treasury. It was a transaction so fundamentally flawed and exquisitely pathetic, it required no immediate intervention. I leaned back in my chair, sipping from a bottle of mineral water, waiting for the executive to plug the drive into his computer. Before the executive could inspect the digital merchandise, the radio clipped to Vance buzzed with a sharp, static alert. The floor manager stationed in the grand lobby requested immediate assistance. I looked up at the primary central monitor. The pristine choreography of the morning reception was fracturing. I left the security room and took the service elevator up to the ground floor. The doors parted and the sound of shrill, hysterical weeping echoed across the vaulted ceiling. Guests in tailored suits and silk dresses stopped their conversations, staring at the center of the room. I walked through the crowd, keeping my posture rigid. Patricia stood near the grand staircase, demanding the attention of every person within earshot. Her tweed jacket was wrinkled, and her makeup was smeared in a deliberate display of manufactured distress. She clutched her chest, swaying on her heels as if she might collapse. Vanessa stood beside her, offering hollow words of comfort, while scanning the crowd to ensure the wealthy guests were watching. When Patricia saw me approaching in my gray housekeeping apron, her weeping stopped. Her eyes locked onto mine, burning with venomous intent. She raised a trembling finger and pointed directly at my chest. She demanded the crowd look at me. Patricia shrieked that her most prized possession was missing. She claimed she had secured a flawless heirloom diamond necklace valued at $150,000 inside the wall safe of the presidential suite. According to her narrative, she returned from breakfast to find the safe empty and the suite doors undisturbed. Patricia took a step forward, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. She accused me of utilizing a master override key to breach the penthouse while she was dining. She spun a rapid, detailed lie, claiming she had seen me lingering near the top-floor elevator banks earlier in the morning. She branded me a common thief, masquerading as a maid, declaring that the working-class staff of the hotel were running an organized crime ring targeting vulnerable, wealthy patrons. The accusation was a calculated, desperate escalation. Patricia did not want a comped room anymore. She wanted an insurance payout to cover her hidden debts, and she required a scapegoat to legitimize the claim. I did not raise my voice to deny the allegations. I did not shrink under the collective gaze of the murmuring high society crowd. I stood near my cleaning cart, waiting for her to exhaust her theatrical performance. The heavy revolving glass doors at the front entrance spun open. The morning sunlight spilled across the marble floor, illuminating 2 uniformed officers from the New York Police Department. They walked into the lobby, their hands resting casually near their heavy-duty belts. Patricia had not merely caused a scene. She had escalated the fabrication to a formal criminal complaint. She dialed emergency services before I even left the subterranean security hub. The officers bypassed the concierge desk and walked straight toward the chaotic gathering, their eyes scanning the room until they landed on the woman, pointing an accusing finger at the maid in the gray uniform. The corporate chess match had temporarily paused, replaced by the immediate lethal threat of a criminal arrest. The heavy leather boots of the 2 police officers echoed across the polished marble floor. They walked with the slow, measured pace of authority, their hands resting casually near their heavy-duty equipment belts. The bustling energy of the morning lobby evaporated. Guests in tailored suits and silk dresses stopped their conversations, turning their heads to watch the unfolding spectacle. Patricia stood near the grand staircase, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. Her tweed jacket was wrinkled and her makeup was deliberately smudged to project the image of a traumatized victim. Cynthia stepped forward, pushing her way to the front of the gathering. My mother adjusted her imported silk scarf and looked at the officers before turning a glare of pure disgust toward me. "Officer, please take her through the service exit," Cynthia requested, her voice dripping with venomous fake courtesy. "We cannot have this kind of criminal element ruining our weekend. We are hosting a high society event, and this maid is a stain on the establishment." Vanessa chimed in, nodding vigorously as she stood beside our mother. "She is a disturbed individual," Vanessa added, crossing her arms over her expensive designer blouse. "She has always been jealous of my success and my wealth. She stole the diamonds because she is bitter. Just arrest her right now and let us get back to the wedding preparations." I looked at my mother and my sister. Their willingness to throw me into a concrete cell based on a fabricated accusation merely to protect their social standing was a breathtaking display of moral bankruptcy. They did not ask for evidence. They did not question the logic of the situation. They saw an opportunity to discard a family member who did not fit their aristocratic narrative, and they seized it without hesitation. I turned my attention away from my toxic family and faced the lead officer. I kept my hands visible, resting them lightly on the handle of my cleaning cart. I did not raise my voice or display a single ounce of panic. The gray housekeeping uniform I wore was not a mark of lower status. It was the armor of a woman who owned the ground beneath their feet. "Officer, I understand you received a report of grand larceny," I said, projecting my voice so the surrounding elite crowd could hear every syllable. "I am asking you to grant me exactly 60 seconds of your time before you pull out those handcuffs. If the evidence I present does not satisfy your inquiry, I will gladly walk out the front glass doors with you." The officer hesitated, weighing the calm, unyielding authority in my voice against the frantic, theatrical shrieking of Patricia. He exchanged a brief glance with his partner and offered a slow nod. I looked across the expansive lobby and locked eyes with Vance, my chief security officer. I gave him a subtle nod. Vance stood near the concierge station and tapped a rapid sequence of commands into his encrypted tablet. High above the reception desk, a sprawling digital presentation screen, usually reserved for welcoming corporate conferences, flickered to life. The serene high-definition images of tropical luxury resorts vanished. The display was replaced by the stark, high-contrast feed of a hidden security camera. The footage displayed a narrow concrete hallway located deep within the subterranean service corridors of the hotel. It was a restricted area, strictly off-limits to paying guests. The glowing red timestamp on the corner of the screen indicated the recording was captured less than an hour ago. The wealthy crowd in the lobby held their collective breath as the heavy steel fire door creaked open on the screen. Patricia slipped into the dim corridor. She looked over her shoulder, her movements jerky and paranoid. She clutched her crocodile skin handbag tightly against her ribs, breathing heavily. Seconds later, a second figure stepped into the frame. It was a man wearing a faded generic courier uniform, but his posture lacked any professional courtesy. He wore a bruised leather jacket over his shirt and moved with the wary tension of a seasoned street operative. Patricia reached into her handbag and extracted a square velvet box. She handed it to the man. The crowd gasped as the operative opened the box, pulling out a brilliant diamond necklace. He held the jewels up to the harsh fluorescent lighting, inspecting the stones with a small magnification loupe. Satisfied with the authenticity of the gems, he shoved the necklace deep into his jacket pocket. He reached into his satchel and handed Patricia a thick manila envelope bulging with banded physical cash. I stepped forward, letting the undeniable visual evidence hang in the quiet air. "The man in the video does not work for a legitimate delivery service," I explained, addressing the police officers while keeping my eyes fixed on the mother of the groom. "He is a recognized runner for an underground pawn syndicate operating out of the Diamond District. They specialize in untraceable asset liquidations for high society clients who have exhausted their traditional banking credit lines." I gestured toward this giant screen where Patricia was shown frantically counting the thick stacks of cash. "The mother of the groom carries a staggering, unregulated gambling debt." I continued stripping away her aristocratic facade layer by layer. "The loan sharks demanded immediate payment. She could not ask her brilliant investment banker son for the capital because he is currently drowning in his own financial ruin. So she liquidated her only remaining asset of value. She sold her own heirloom necklace to a black market broker for a fraction of its appraised worth just to keep the collectors from breaking her legs. But a woman like Patricia never stops at a single scam. I added my voice, echoing through the silent, vaulted lobby. She needed the cash to pay the syndicate, but she also wanted the full replacement value of the diamonds back in her pocket. She filed a false police report intending to extort the liability insurance policy of this hotel. She assumed she could blame a nameless maid wearing a gray uniform and walk away with a six-figure settlement check. The lead officer looked at the presentation screen, watching the footage loop, and then turned his stern gaze toward Patricia. The color had drained from her face, leaving her skin a sickly, translucent shade. Her jaw hung open. The fabricated outrage was gone, replaced by genuine, paralyzing terror. She took a stumbling step backward, her designer heels catching on the edge of a woven rug. The officer did not hesitate. He closed the distance between them in two long, deliberate strides. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it firmly behind her tailored tweed jacket. The sharp metallic ratcheting of the steel handcuffs shattered the quiet atmosphere of the lobby. You are under arrest for filing a false police report and felony insurance fraud. The officer stated, his voice hard and uncompromising. Patricia began to weep. It was not the theatrical sobbing she had displayed earlier to garner sympathy. It was the ugly, breathless weeping of a woman realizing her entire world had just collapsed. The officers marched her toward the revolving doors, parading the ruined social climber past the very elite guests she had spent her life trying to impress. The glass doors spun, catching the morning light, as the police escorted Patricia into the back of a waiting patrol cruiser. I watched the vehicle pull away from the curb. The lobby remained paralyzed by the sudden shift in reality. Then a sharp, guttural sound broke the silence. Marcus had descended the grand staircase. He had witnessed the entire arrest from the mezzanine landing. The brilliant Ivy League investment banker, the man who spent his life projecting an aura of untouchable superiority, finally fractured. He saw his mother hauled away in steel cuffs. He knew his fraudulent takeover attempt in the wine cellar was dead. He knew his attempt to sell my stolen corporate data upstairs was a futile gesture. The walls were closing in, and the cold reality of a federal prison sentence stared him directly in the face. Panic eradicates sophistication. A cornered predator discards strategy and resorts to primal physical violence. Marcus lunged forward, crossing the marble floor with terrifying speed. He did not target me. He grabbed Vanessa. His hand closed around her upper arm with bruising force, pulling her roughly against his chest. He positioned her in front of him, utilizing his future bride as a physical and psychological shield. Vanessa let out a sharp cry of pain, her designer clutch clattering onto the hard floor. David and Cynthia froze, their paternal instincts overridden by sheer shock. Marcus ignored my parents. He locked his wild, bloodshot eyes onto mine. The polished accent and the measured corporate vocabulary were gone. He issued a raw, breathless ultimatum that echoed through the space. I want $2 million wired into an offshore routing account right now, Marcus snarled, his voice shaking with untamed adrenaline. I do not care about the hotel anymore. I do not care about the wedding. You are going to authorize the transfer immediately, or I will burn her life to the ground. He tightened his grip on Vanessa, making her gasp in pain. You think you are the only one who collects leverage, he threatened, staring at me with pure desperation. I have a secure digital vault filled with highly explicit compromising materials of your sister. Videos, photographs, private text messages. If that wire transfer does not clear my account in 5 minutes, I am pressing send. I will broadcast every single file to her corporate sponsors, her cosmetic partners, and her millions of followers. Her precious influencer career will be annihilated today. Marcus stood in the center of the grand lobby, holding his bride like a human shield. The tailored charcoal suit he wore no longer projected Wall Street dominance. It clung to a man unraveling in real time. Vanessa whimpered, her manicured fingers clawing ineffectually at the rigid arm locked across her collarbone. David and Cynthia remained frozen near the grand staircase, their parental instincts paralyzed by the sudden eruption of primal danger. The elite guests who had gathered to witness a high society spectacle now found themselves held hostage by the raw desperation of a cornered predator. Marcus did not lower his voice. He wanted the audience. He craved the leverage that public humiliation provided. He tightened his grip, forcing Vanessa to stand upright, and glared at me across the polished marble floor. "You think you are the architect of this game?" He spat, his words echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You think holding the deed to a building makes you untouchable? I have spent my entire career breaking untouchable targets. I do not bluff, Harper. I have a secure digital vault filled with high-resolution files documenting every hidden indiscretion your sister has ever committed. Videos, photographs, private text messages. Material that makes her pristine influencer brand look like a cheap joke." He shifted his weight, breathing heavy, carrying the frantic energy of a man watching his empire burn. He detailed the exact mechanics of his extortion. Every single cosmetic contract she signed contains a strict morality clause. He explained, a dark, vindictive satisfaction lacing his tone. If those files hit the internet, her corporate sponsors will sever their ties within the hour. The lifestyle network will demonetize her channel. Her audience will tear her apart. I will reduce her digital identity to ashes. I want $2 million wired into an offshore routing account in the Cayman Islands right now. I will not ask twice. I stood near my housekeeping cart, observing his performance. I did not reach for a phone to authorize a wire transfer. I did not negotiate. I simply let his words hang in the silent lobby, allowing the gravity of his demands to settle over the crowd. "Have you concluded your demands?" I asked, keeping my voice even and devoid of any panic. Marcus narrowed his bloodshot eyes. "Send the money, Harper." I stepped away from the cart and walked slowly toward the center of the room, stopping just a few feet away from the struggling couple. "You operate in the elite tiers of the financial sector," Marcus, I said, analyzing his frantic posture. "You analyze risk for a living. Yet your ego blinds you to the foundational architecture of your own environment. You assumed this lobby was just a pretty backdrop for your wedding." I raised my hand and pointed toward the towering marble pillars flanking the reception desk. "Look at the brass plaques bolted to the stone," I instructed. Marcus blinked, his gaze darting toward the heavy pillars. Bolted at eye level on every column were polished brass signs, engraved with clear, stark lettering. The text stated that the premises were subject to continuous 24-hour audio and visual recording. New York law requires one-party consent for recording. I explained, delivering the legal reality with surgical precision. But corporate lobbies with visible posted signage bypass all privacy expectations. The surveillance grid in this hotel does not merely capture video. The microphones embedded in the chandeliers record high-definition audio. The color drained from his face a second time today. His grip on Vanessa loosened a fraction as the realization took root. "You did not just issue a threat in a private room." I continued, my words striking like physical blows. "You stood in the center of a crowded commercial space and demanded a $2 million ransom under the threat of reputational destruction. You just committed felony extortion in the second degree." The security feed was broadcast live to my underground control room. The digital file is already compiled, encrypted, and sitting in a cloud server awaiting transmission to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "You handed me your own confession on a silver platter." Marcus stumbled backward, releasing Vanessa. She collapsed onto the marble floor, weeping uncontrollably, holding her bruised arm. Cynthia finally broke her paralysis, rushing forward to pull her favorite daughter away from the ruined groom. Marcus stared at the brass plaques, his chest heaving. The extortion play was dead. The federal charges were multiplying by the hour. He looked at me, his eyes wide with the hollow terror of a man realizing he was trapped in a cage he helped build. "I am not wiring you a single cent," I stated, turning my back on his panic and walking toward the concierge desk. "In fact, we need to discuss the staggering liabilities you already carry." I reached behind the polished mahogany counter and retrieved a thick, leather-bound legal portfolio. I turned around and slid the heavy folder across the smooth stone surface until it stopped inches from his bespoke leather shoes. "You projected the image of an unstoppable billionaire," I said, watching him stare at the portfolio. "But true wealth does not require high-interest loans. I audited your personal real estate holdings last night. You purchased that sprawling penthouse in Tribeca and the summer estate in the Hamptons using variable-rate mortgages. You leveraged the collateral to the breaking point to maintain a lifestyle you could not actually afford." Marcus shook his head, a slow mechanical movement of denial. "When the commercial markets detected the anomalies in your client ledgers, your lenders panicked," I explained, outlining his financial autopsy. "They classified your mortgages as toxic underwater paper. Banks despise volatility. They wanted your liabilities off their books before the federal regulators arrived. They packaged your debt and sold it on the secondary market at a steep discount to a private equity firm." I walked back toward the concierge desk, folding my hands, resting them on the cool marble. "I own that private equity firm," I announced. The words rang through the silent lobby, severing the final thread of his elite identity. "I bought your debt, Marcus. I am your sole creditor," I declared. "And because you violated the criminal activity clauses hidden deep within the fine print of those original mortgage contracts, I exercised my right to accelerate the collection. That portfolio at your feet contains the formal notices of immediate foreclosure. The bank locked the doors to your Tribeca penthouse an hour ago. You do not own the Hamptons estate. You do not own the cars parked in the garage. You are destitute." Marcus dropped to his knees. The sharp impact of his bones hitting the marble echoed through the room. The polished investment banker was gone. He was a man stripped of his mother, his career, his freedom, and his home. He stared at the leather folder, his mind shattering under the weight of total systemic ruin. But a predator does not surrender. When cornered by undeniable defeat, they pivot to the path of least resistance. Marcus knew he could not fight a billionaire who owned his debt and held his recorded confession. He needed a way out of the country tonight, and he required untraceable capital to buy his passage. Vanessa knelt a few feet away, sobbing into her mother's shoulder. When Marcus had grabbed her earlier, her designer clutch fell, spilling its contents across the floor. Amidst the scattered lipstick tubes and compact mirrors lay her customized smartphone. Marcus lowered his head, feigning a posture of total surrender. He let his shoulders slump, hiding his face from the crowd. He reached a trembling hand forward, pretending to steady himself against the floor. His fingers brushed the smooth glass of the smartphone. With the practiced sleight of hand of a seasoned thief, he slid the device up his sleeve, concealing it beneath the fabric of his tailored jacket. He knew her passcode. He knew the biometric bypass. More importantly, he knew the exact routing numbers for their joint marital banking accounts. For the past 6 months, elite guests, family members, and corporate sponsors had been depositing early wedding cash gifts into that specific fund. The ledger held hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquid, unmonitored currency. Marcus slowly pushed himself off the floor, keeping his eyes downcast. He played the role of a defeated man shuffling toward the grand staircase to escape the public humiliation. But beneath the facade, his mind raced with cold sociopathic calculation. He intended to lock himself in a bathroom stall, bypass the secondary authentication on her phone, and liquidate the entire wedding fund. He would convert the stolen cash into an untraceable cryptocurrency wallet within minutes. The digital transfer would buy him a midnight charter flight to Dubai, far beyond the reach of federal extradition treaties. The groom was preparing to leave his weeping bride with nothing but shattered glass and insurmountable debt. Marcus shuffled away from the center of the lobby, his head bowed in a posture of artificial defeat. He played the role of the humiliated groom with practiced ease. But my eyes caught the unnatural stiffness in his right arm. I noticed the slight rectangular bulge inside his tailored sleeve. He had successfully slipped Vanessa's custom smartphone into his jacket pocket during the chaotic aftermath of the extortion failure. A desperate man stripped of his credit lines and facing imminent incarceration will invariably cannibalize his closest allies. He walked briskly toward the secluded restroom corridors located near the East Wing. He needed privacy to access the joint marital accounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in early wedding gifts, generously deposited by elite guests and corporate sponsors, sat untouched in that shared ledger. He intended to wire the liquid currency through a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange, convert the dollars to untraceable digital tokens, and secure a midnight charter flight to Dubai. An inexperienced corporate officer might have panicked and ordered the hotel network administrators to sever the wireless internet connection across the entire building. That is an amateur tactic born of panic. A seasoned Wall Street banker possesses high-speed cellular data and encrypted mobile hotspots. You cannot halt a financial hemorrhage by turning off a router. You stop it by freezing the institutional arteries at the source. I tapped my wireless earpiece and opened a secure communication channel directly to the compliance division of the elite investment bank I secretly controlled. I bypassed the standard authorization queues, leveraging my shadow equity to speak directly to the chief risk officer. I provided Marcus personal identification numbers, the joint account routing details, and the suspected fraudulent transaction parameters. I ordered a Level 4 anti-money laundering lock placed on all associated assets immediately. This specific federal safeguard exists to prevent rapid domestic capital flight. When triggered by the compliance department, it does not merely decline a single transaction. It instantly paralyzes the entire financial profile across all integrated banking networks. Downstairs, inside a locked marble stall, Marcus sat sweating through his expensive shirt. His hands shook as he navigated the crypto exchange application. He typed in the transfer amount and hit the execute button. He waited for the green confirmation screen that would guarantee his freedom. Instead, the application algorithms detected the institutional anomaly. The transfer did not process. The system swallowed the request, generating a stark red error code. The bank locked the accounts tighter than a federal vault. His international escape route dissolved into digital ash. 4 floors above the lobby, the atmosphere inside the bridal suite was a frantic display of manufactured perfection. Vanessa had retreated to her sanctuary, attempting to erase the humiliating spectacle downstairs by drowning herself in luxury. She sat in a plush velvet chair, wearing a custom silk robe, surrounded by a team of elite makeup artists and hairstylists. The sprawling room smelled of imported hairspray and expensive floral arrangements. The $50,000 wedding gown hung near the window, a pristine symbol of the high society life she demanded. She needed to regain her sense of superiority. Her preferred method of asserting dominance was spending ridiculous sums of money to remind the service staff of her status. The lead makeup artist finished applying a layer of setting powder and gently requested the final payment for the morning services. Vanessa offered a strained, haughty smile. She reached into a backup leather clutch and extracted her premium black card. She handed the heavy metal plastic to the stylist, instructing her to add a 20% gratuity for the inconvenience of the morning drama. She wanted to project the image of an unbothered, wealthy bride. The stylist swiped the card through a mobile terminal. The machine emitted a harsh electronic tone. Declined. Vanessa frowned, snatching the card back. She blamed the hotel network connection, claiming the thick walls of the suite interfered with the signal. She pulled out her primary platinum debit card and handed it over. The stylist swiped it again. A second error tone echoed through the quiet suite. Declined. Contact issuing institution. The haughty smile vanished from my sister's face. She grabbed the terminal, staring at the glowing red text. She pulled open her banking application on a backup tablet, resting on the vanity. The screen loaded, displaying her checking accounts, her savings ledgers, and the joint wedding fund. Every single balance read 0 available credit. A stark banner across the top of the interface indicated a hard institutional freeze. The realization that she was severed from her wealth shattered her fragile composure. Vanessa did not handle adversity with grace or logic. She handled it with unhinged entitlement. She unleashed a visceral scream that sent the makeup artist stumbling backward toward the door. She swept her arm across the vanity, sending hundreds of dollars of premium cosmetics crashing onto the hardwood floor. Powders and foundations shattered, staining the expensive rug. She grabbed a crystal champagne flute from a nearby silver tray and hurled it against the imported silk wallpaper. The glass shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces, raining down on the plush carpet. The wedding planners rushed into the room, trying to calm her. Vanessa turned her fury onto them. She screamed that they were incompetent, demanding they call the bank and fix the error instantly. She paced the length of the suite, her silk robe billowing behind her, transforming the luxurious space into a chaotic war zone of broken crystal and spilled champagne. She convinced herself this was my doing. She assumed I was enacting a petty revenge scheme, using my authority as the hotel chairman to somehow manipulate her credit lines. She shrieked that I was a jealous, vindictive maid trying to ruin her high society debut. She yelled promises of destruction, swearing she would call every financial reporter in the city and spin a story of corporate abuse that would ensure my initial public offering died on the trading floor before the market even opened. I walked through the open doorway of the bridal suite. The wedding planners and the styling team parted immediately, creating a wide path for me to enter. I stepped carefully over the scattered cosmetics and the jagged shards of crystal champagne flutes. The drab gray housekeeping uniform I wore stood in stark contrast to the ruined opulence of the room. I did not raise my voice to compete with her screaming. I walked directly toward her, stopping just outside her striking distance. Vanessa pointed a trembling finger at my face. "Fix it," she demanded, her chest heaving, as tears of pure rage ruined her fresh makeup. "Unlock my cards right now, Harper. You think you can humiliate me on my wedding day and steal my money just because you own this building? I will destroy your company. I will burn your reputation to the ground." I let her exhaust her vocal cords. When she finally paused to draw a ragged breath, I reached into the deep pocket of my apron. I extracted my secure, encrypted tablet. I tapped the screen, pulling up the raw institutional banking logs transmitted by the compliance department. I held the device out, offering it to her. "Read the screen," Vanessa, I instructed, keeping my tone surgical and devoid of any sympathy. She snatched the tablet, glaring at the illuminated data. Her eyes scanned the dense financial text. She saw the timestamps. She saw the origin codes. She saw the exact destination routing numbers for the decentralized cryptocurrency exchange based in the United Arab Emirates. "I did not freeze your accounts," I said, delivering the brutal reality without hesitation. "I do not need to steal your money. I have my own." The institutional lock on your portfolio was triggered automatically by a federal fraud algorithm. Vanessa stared at the screen, her breathing turning shallow. She shook her head, unable to process the betrayal staring back at her in black and white. "Marcus stole your phone in the lobby," I explained, mapping the exact sequence of his treason for her to absorb. "He locked himself in a restroom stall downstairs. He accessed your joint wedding fund and attempted to liquidate every single dollar you possess. He tried to convert your cash into untraceable digital tokens." I took a step closer, forcing her to look up from the screen and meet my gaze. "He is not trying to save the wedding," I stated, my words striking like physical blows. "He is actively draining your life savings to purchase a one-way flight to Dubai. He knows the federal authorities are closing in on his embezzlement. He knows he is going to prison. The man you intend to marry was preparing to flee the country, leaving you behind to face the creditors, the public humiliation, and the debt alone. Your groom just tried to rob you blind." I expected the classic theatrical display of a betrayed bride, dropping to her knees and weeping over a shattered romance. A woman who just discovered her groom attempted to drain her accounts and flee the country should have crumbled under the weight of the deception. Vanessa did not collapse. She stared at the digital banking logs glowing on the tablet screen. The flush of manufactured rage drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a stark, pale canvas. She did not hurl another champagne flute. She turned her back to me, walked toward the heavy oak doors of the suite, and engaged the steel deadbolt. The sharp metallic click echoed through the ruined room, locking the stylists and the event planners out in the hallway. She faced me, her breathing erratic and shallow. The curated influencer persona vanished. The illusion of the naive high society beauty queen dissolved into the cold air. What remained standing among the broken crystal was a cornered accomplice calculating her odds of survival. She dropped the tablet onto the vanity, pushing aside the shattered cosmetics with a trembling hand. "You do not understand the mechanics of this situation," she whispered, her voice devoid of its usual arrogant pitch. "I understand basic mathematics," I replied, keeping my distance. "He tried to liquidate your assets to fund his escape across international borders." "He did not steal the money." Vanessa countered, her eyes darting across the room as if searching for hidden microphones. "He was moving the capital to the secondary ledger. We established a protocol for emergency liquidity." The words hung in the quiet suite. The implication was profound and chilling. I studied her face, observing the raw, desperate calculation in her eyes. The puzzle pieces snapped into place, forming a picture far more sinister than a simple romantic betrayal. "You knew," I stated, the realization turning the air freezing cold. Vanessa gripped the edge of the vanity, her knuckles turning white. She did not deny the accusation. The dam broke and the confession spilled out in a rushed, frantic whisper. She admitted she was not a blind victim of his financial machinations. She was a willing architect. Maintaining a top-tier influencer brand required an astronomical burn rate. The designer wardrobes, the private jet charters, the constant stream of luxury content outpaced her legitimate endorsement revenue months ago. She was drowning in debt while projecting an image of limitless wealth. Marcus offered a solution. He possessed access to dormant pension funds belonging to elderly clients, but he needed a clean mechanism to wash the capital before it entered the mainstream banking system. Vanessa provided the laundering apparatus. She utilized her status as a high-profile bride to establish a network of shell companies. She registered a phantom floral import business in Delaware and a ghost catering logistics firm in Nevada. Marcus wired the stolen retirement funds into these limited liability companies under the guise of exorbitant wedding expenses. Vanessa then signed the fraudulent corporate invoices authorizing the transfer of clean-washed currency back into their joint marital accounts. She helped a Wall Street banker steal from vulnerable pensioners just to buy her designer shoes and maintain her digital superiority. She sank to the floor, sitting among the shattered glass. Her expensive silk robe soaked up the spilled champagne. She looked up at me, her face a mask of pure terror. "If the banking compliance officers trace the routing numbers back to my shell companies, the federal prosecutors will indict me for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the pressure. "They will seize my brand. They will freeze my endorsement contracts permanently. I will go to a federal prison, Harper." She crawled forward, grasping the hem of my gray housekeeping apron. She begged me to call off the internal investigation. She pleaded with me to use my corporate authority as chairman to erase the digital footprints within the hotel banking nodes before the authorities arrived. I stepped back, pulling the coarse fabric from her grip. "You want me to cover up a federal crime so you can walk away clean?" I asked. "No," she answered, scrambling to her feet, her desperation mutating into a chilling legal strategy. "I just need you to keep quiet for 2 more hours. Just until the ceremony concludes and the paperwork is signed." I looked at her, trying to decipher the endgame. Why would you still walk down the aisle with a man who just triggered a federal banking lock and attempted to abandon you? Because the federal government recognizes spousal privilege, she revealed, delivering the ultimate plot twist with breathtaking clarity. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Under federal evidentiary rules, a prosecutor cannot compel a wife to testify against her husband in a criminal proceeding. If the Financial Crimes Division built a case against Marcus, they would inevitably subpoena Vanessa to map the money laundering network. If she remained single, she would be forced to take the witness stand, hand over her communications, and testify under oath or face severe contempt charges. If she married him today, she gained an impenetrable legal shield. She could invoke adverse spousal testimony privilege, severing the primary link between the stolen pensions and the shell companies. She did not love him. She did not care about the betrayal or the stolen funds. She needed the marriage certificate to form a binding legal fortress. She was preparing to walk down the aisle and bind herself to a predator strictly to secure immunity from a federal indictment. "Let me secure the license," she begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her pristine makeup. "Once the ink dries on the state registry, I do not care what happens to him. Just let me put the ring on my finger." I looked at my sister standing amidst the ruins of her vanity, offering to sell her future to avoid accountability. I did not offer her absolution. I did not agree to her terms. I simply turned away, unlocked the heavy oak door, and walked out of the suite, leaving her trapped in her own escalating nightmare. The battle on the upper floors was a psychological autopsy, but the primary conflict awaited me on the ground floor. I took the service elevator down to the lobby level. The morning preparations were complete, and the first wave of elite guests had begun to arrive for the pre-wedding reception. I checked my earpiece, listening to the encrypted chatter from the security team. Vance reported a priority arrival at the front entrance. I walked toward the mezzanine balcony overlooking the main floor, keeping myself concealed behind a marble pillar. The revolving glass doors spun, and a man possessing an aura of undeniable authority entered the hotel. He wore a pristine navy blue suit tailored perfectly to his frame. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his posture projected the quiet dominance of a seasoned Wall Street veteran. He was the chief executive officer of the elite investment bank where Marcus operated. He commanded an institution that moved billions of dollars daily. He paused near the concierge desk, checking his gold watch, preparing to mingle with the high society crowd. He did not make it to the reception hall. Marcus intercepted him near the elevator banks. The groom looked ragged. His charcoal suit was wrinkled. A thin layer of sweat coated his forehead, and his eyes darted nervously around the lobby. He looked like a hunted animal, desperate for a lifeline. Marcus stepped into the path of his boss, blocking his advance. The older man frowned, annoyed by the sudden breach of professional distance. Marcus did not offer a standard greeting. He reached into his pocket and extracted the silver USB drive he had stolen from my executive suite earlier that morning. He held it out, a physical token of his desperation. He spoke in a rapid, hushed tone, pitching his treason to the only man he believed could save him. Marcus told the chief executive that the drive contained the ultimate prize. He claimed he had successfully bypassed the Waldorf Astoria security firewalls and downloaded the complete proprietary VIP client registry. He promised the data included the unlisted contact numbers, the offshore routing preferences, and the hidden investment habits of the wealthiest individuals on the planet. He offered to hand over the drive immediately. In exchange, he demanded a permanent promotion to the position of vice president and an emergency cash advance of $500,000. He promised the intelligence on the drive would generate millions in new revenue for the bank. Marcus stood there, sweating, trembling, offering stolen corporate data to secure his own survival. He believed he was negotiating a brilliant exit strategy. He thought the chief executive would recognize his ruthless initiative and grant him the capital required to replace the embezzled pension funds before the Monday audit. He failed to comprehend the lethal geometry of the trap he had just walked into. The chief executive officer stood near the polished brass doors of the elevator bank, evaluating the sweating man before him. The older executive operated in a world defined by calculated risk and pristine optics. Marcus represented a severe deviation from that standard. Yet the promise of the proprietary client registry held undeniable allure. Information was the highest currency on Wall Street. The older man reached out and accepted the silver drive. He unclipped a slim encrypted tablet from the inner pocket of his navy jacket and inserted the drive into the port. A loading bar appeared on the screen as the internal security protocols scanned the data packets. The screen illuminated his face with a pale blue glow. He tapped the glass, navigating through the root directory of the drive. The file names alone, representing lists of sovereign wealth fund managers, private offshore accounts, and foreign dignitaries, were enough to guarantee a lucrative quarter. The older man nodded his greed temporarily, overriding his strict adherence to compliance protocols. Marcus leaned closer, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He breathed heavy, tracking the progress bar, waiting for the confirmation that would grant him his requested cash advance and a vice president title. The brass doors of the adjacent VIP elevator chimed a soft, resonant note. The doors slid apart. I stepped into the lobby. I no longer wore the drab gray housekeeping uniform. The coarse apron and the faded cotton were discarded upstairs. I wore a bespoke charcoal power suit cut from Italian wool, tailored to project rigid geometry and unyielding authority. The fabric absorbed the light, rendering me a sharp silhouette against the gilded opulence of the hotel. My heels struck the marble with a deliberate rhythmic cadence, drawing the attention of the surrounding guests. Marcus heard the approaching footsteps and turned his head. His expression morphed into an immediate sneer. He saw a woman he still fundamentally categorized as a subordinate, disrupting his critical negotiation. "Step back, Harper," he ordered, his voice tight with irritation. He waved a dismissive hand toward the grand staircase. "The real executives are conducting a private transaction. Go find a cleaning cart and make yourself useful before I have security escort you out of the reception area." I did not break my stride. I stopped 3 feet away from them, holding my posture perfectly straight. The chief executive officer looked up from his tablet, annoyed by the interruption. His eyes scanned my tailored suit and locked onto my face. The annoyance vanished. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving his weathered skin a stark, translucent white. The tablet trembled slightly in his grip. He recognized me. He did not see a rogue maid or a disruptive family member. He saw the apex predator of his financial ecosystem. The CEO snapped his posture to rigid attention. He reached down and buttoned his navy jacket in a gesture of deep, professional deference. He ignored Marcus entirely. He bowed his head, lowering his gaze to the marble floor. "Good afternoon, Madam Chairman," he said, his baritone voice carrying a tremor of genuine fear. Marcus froze. The breath caught in his throat. He looked at his boss and then turned his head slowly to look at me. The cognitive dissonance fractured his mind. The CEO stood in a posture of submission before the woman Marcus had spent the entire morning insulting. I kept my gaze locked on the older executive. "Hand me the drive," I instructed. The CEO complied instantly, ejecting the silver device and placing it into my open palm. I turned my attention to Marcus. The arrogant groom stood paralyzed, his jaw slack. "You operate under the delusion that Wall Street is a vast, disconnected ocean." I began, keeping my tone flat and surgical. "You believe you can steal data from my servers and sell it to a rival firm without triggering a structural alarm." I slipped the drive into the pocket of my suit jacket. 3 months ago, my private equity firm executed a silent consolidation of voting shares across the secondary market. I explained, outlining the exact parameters of his doom. "I purchased the underwater debt portfolios of your parent company. I currently hold 60% of the equity at your institution. The man standing next to you does not answer to a board of directors." I continued, pointing a single finger at the CEO. "He reports directly to my treasury. You just stood in my lobby and attempted to sell my stolen corporate intelligence to a man who cashes his paychecks from my accounts. You tried to fence stolen goods to the owner of the store." The silence in the elevator alcove grew suffocating. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The realization of his terminal miscalculation crushed the remaining oxygen from his lungs. I turned back to the chief executive. "You have a rogue director attempting to sell stolen data and secure fraudulent cash advances," I stated. "Handle your personnel." The CEO turned towards Marcus, his expression hardening into a mask of pure corporate wrath. The fear he felt toward me instantly transmuted into lethal fury, directed at his subordinate. "Marcus, you are terminated, effective immediately." The CEO declared the words, striking like physical blows. "Your access badges are revoked. Your trading terminals are locked. I am contacting the Securities and Exchange Commission Compliance Board right now to strip your Series 7 and Series 63 licenses. You are banned from the financial sector for the rest of your natural life." The CEO turned on his heel and marched away, pulling out his phone to execute the termination orders. Marcus stood alone in the alcove. The bespoke suit, The Ivy League pedigree, the elite banking status, all erased in a matter of 60 seconds. He possessed no wealth, no leverage, and no future. The psychological toll of terminal defeat breaks the human mind in unpredictable ways. A rational man would drop to his knees and beg for leniency. A sociopath, cornered by his own hubris, burns the surrounding forest. Marcus let out a low, ragged breath. His eyes darkened, losing the final remnants of sanity. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out his encrypted laptop. He did not care about the federal agents or the wedding anymore. He wanted revenge. He set the laptop on a marble cocktail table and flipped the screen open. He typed with furious manic speed, bypassing the standard login protocols. He accessed a hidden terminal connecting to a shadow brokerage interface. "You think taking my licenses stops the market?" He snarled his fingers, flying across the keyboard. "You think you can humiliate me and ring the opening bell on Monday morning? I still have the routing keys to the remaining pension funds. I have millions in liquid capital sitting in ghost accounts." Marcus initiated a complex sequence of institutional trades. The screen filled with cascading lines of green code. He bypassed the standard institutional gateways, diving directly into the unregulated dark pools where high-frequency trading firms exchanged vast blocks of equity in milliseconds. He was not trying to steal the money anymore. He was weaponizing it. He intended to execute a naked short sale against the primary holding company of the Waldorf Astoria. A naked short sale is an illicit maneuver where a trader sells shares they do not own and have not borrowed. It floods the market with counterfeit supply, driving the stock price into the ground. By dumping heavy volumes of phantom shares onto the dark pools, Marcus aimed to create a synthetic liquidity crisis. He wanted to trigger a high-frequency algorithmic panic. If the automated trading bots detected a severe sell-off just hours before my initial public offering, the institutional investors would pull their capital. The stock price would plummet to zero before the market even opened. He planned to tank my life work, crash the hotel valuation, and use the resulting financial chaos as a smokescreen to slip out the back doors while the federal authorities scrambled to contain the market fallout. He hit the execute key, a chilling smile stretching across his face, waiting for the digital destruction to begin. The quiet alcove off the main lobby echoed with the rapid, frantic clatter of plastic keys. Marcus sat hunched over the marble cocktail table, staring into the glowing screen of his encrypted laptop. The polished veneer of the Wall Street executive had dissolved, leaving behind a man operating on sheer feral panic. He bypassed the standard institutional gateways of his former bank, diving directly into the unregulated dark pools where high-frequency trading firms exchanged vast blocks of equity in milliseconds. He intended to flood the secondary exchanges with phantom stock, dumping unregulated synthetic shares into the digital ether. He believed he could manipulate the algorithms governing the trading bots, forcing them into a sudden sell-off. He wanted to crash the valuation of my hotel before the market opened. To execute a high-frequency algorithmic strike, a trader requires zero latency. A wireless connection is too slow. Marcus understood this. The marble cocktail table he selected was not merely decorative furniture. It functioned as an executive presentation hub equipped with a direct fiber optic data port, hardwired into the primary servers of the Waldorf Astoria. He had connected a braided data cable from his laptop directly into this port, securing a flawless high-speed uplink to the global financial network. He thought he was utilizing my own infrastructure to orchestrate my ruin. I stood 3 feet away, watching the manic rhythm of his keystrokes. A novice executive would have shouted for security personnel to tackle him. A frightened owner might have attempted to wrestle the laptop from his grip. Physical confrontation introduces unpredictable variables and unnecessary risk. I preferred the cold certainty of digital architecture. He believed he was a financial deity, commanding the market through his terminal. He failed to realize he was tethered to a network I designed. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored charcoal suit jacket. My fingers closed around a thick braided lanyard. Attached to the end of the dark fabric was a scuffed, rectangular piece of gray plastic. It was the master radio frequency identification keycard. Just a few hours prior, I knelt on the lobby floor, wearing a drab housekeeping apron. Marcus had looked down at this exact piece of plastic dangling from my neck and laughed. He mocked the card, calling it a janitor's leash. He assumed it only granted access to subterranean supply closets and service elevators. His Ivy League education blinded him to the hierarchy of modern smart building technology. In a luxury skyscraper, the master key does not just unlock physical doors. It commands the digital skeleton of the entire property. It controls the security grid, the ventilation protocols, the elevator logic, and the localized server routing. On his laptop screen, a green progress bar initiated. The dark pool ledger began to accept the synthetic shares. He needed 10 seconds for the fraudulent transaction to clear the institutional firewalls and penetrate the open market. He let out a ragged, breathless laugh, his eyes wide and bloodshot, reflecting the scrolling code. I closed the distance between us in 2 silent steps. Marcus did not look up from the screen. He did not sense my approach. I did not speak a word. I held the gray plastic card in my right hand and pressed it flat against the administrative sensor embedded beneath the polished surface of the marble table. The system registered the encrypted biometric signature instantly. The soft blue light illuminating the data port shifted to a harsh, glaring crimson. A sharp, electronic tone cut through the quiet alcove, signaling a hard override. On the laptop screen, the cascading lines of green code froze. The progress bar halted abruptly at 9%. The trading interface flickered and dissolved, replaced by a stark black command prompt window. The text read, "Connection terminated by Supreme Administrative Command." Marcus slammed his palm against the keyboard. He typed rapid strings of recovery commands, attempting to force a reboot of the trading script. The keys yielded 0 results. The hotel servers had severed the physical connection at the root level, killing the data transfer mid-cycle. The network isolated his terminal, dropping his internet protocol address and bricking his credentials. The phantom shares vanished from the queue. The short sale died before a single fraction of equity reached the open market. He stared at the black screen, his chest heaving. The electronic tone faded, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. He pulled the braided data cable from the laptop and shoved it back into the port, hoping for a manual reset. The port remained dead glowing with that unforgiving crimson light. I looked down at the ruined Groom. I pulled the lanyard back, letting the gray plastic card rest against the lapel of my bespoke suit. "The janitor's leash holds a very tight grip," I said, keeping my tone even and surgical. Marcus slowly looked up from the dead screen. The realization of his terminal failure washed over him. The arrogance, the manipulative charm, the calculated cruelty, all evaporated. He was just a man sitting in a hotel lobby, staring at a useless piece of metal. He had played every card in his deck. He had attempted extortion, corporate sabotage, and market manipulation. Every single strike had been neutralized utilizing the precise rules of the ecosystem he claimed to rule. Before he could form a response, a deep resonant sound shifted the atmosphere of the room. The heavy revolving glass doors at the front entrance of the hotel stopped spinning. The locking mechanisms clicked as the panels were pushed open and secured, holding the entrance wide open to the bustling Manhattan street. The rhythmic sound of heavy tactical boots striking the imported stone floor echoed across the lobby. A dozen federal agents entered the building. They did not wear tailored suits. They wore dark utilitarian windbreakers, bearing the bold yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation across their backs. This was not a standard patrol unit responding to a local disturbance. This was a dedicated tactical squad from the Financial Crimes Division. They moved with the terrifying synchronized precision of a predator closing a steel trap. They did not shout orders or draw their weapons. They possessed the quiet, lethal authority of a government entity executing a flawless raid. The agents fanned out, securing the primary exits, flanking the grand staircase, and establishing a rigid perimeter around the reception desk. The elite guests mingling in the lobby stepped back, forming a wide circle of silent witnesses. The high society crowd, accustomed to velvet ropes and VIP treatment, recognized the severe gravity of the federal presence. The lead agent walked directly toward the alcove. He held a thick manila folder in his left hand. I recognized the document seal. It was the comprehensive compliance report I had compiled and transmitted earlier, mapping the exact routing numbers of the embezzled pension funds and the subsequent money laundering shell companies. Marcus saw the windbreakers. He heard the heavy boots. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving his skin the shade of wet ash. He pushed his chair back, the wooden legs scraping harshly against the marble floor. He stumbled backward away from the cocktail table until his shoulders hit the cold stone of a structural pillar. He checked his pockets in a frantic, disjointed motion. He reached for a phone that was no longer there. He patted his jacket for keys to a penthouse that the bank had already foreclosed on. His checking accounts were frozen under a federal anti-money laundering lock. His brokerage licenses were stripped by his former chief executive. His bride was trapped 4 floors above him, facing her own impending federal indictment. He looked toward the service corridor, hoping for a shadowed exit. 2 federal agents already blocked the hallway, their arms crossed, standing like statues. He looked toward the front doors, where the tactical squad stood guard. He possessed 0 liquid capital. He held 0 leverage. He had no allies left to betray. The brilliant investment banker who believed he could outsmart the world was reduced to a trembling, cornered fugitive with nowhere left to run. The grand ballroom on the 2nd floor remained insulated from the tactical federal raid unfolding in the lobby. The heavy soundproof oak doors sealed the elite guests inside a pristine bubble of manufactured elegance. Hundreds of gilded chairs arranged in perfect geometric symmetry held the upper echelon of Manhattan society. Wall Street executives wearing bespoke tuxedos checked their luxury timepieces. High-profile influencers in couture dresses adjusted their posture, ensuring their camera angles captured the opulence of the sprawling floral arches. The air smelled of imported white orchids and expensive perfume. A string quartet positioned near the altar played a flawless, elegant rendition of the traditional wedding march. The classical music swelled, filling the vast vaulted ceiling with an air of regal anticipation. The stage was set for a triumphant high society debut. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung inward on their silent hinges. The velvet ropes were pulled aside by the usher staff. The guests turned their heads, expecting to see the brilliant investment banker step onto the pristine white runner. They expected a groom, radiating power and confidence, ready to claim his flawless bride. The reality that stepped through the doorway fractured the elegant atmosphere instantly. Marcus did not walk with the swagger of an apex predator. He stumbled forward, driven by the firm grip of a federal agent holding his left shoulder. A second agent walked closely behind him, maintaining a rigid tactical formation. The bespoke charcoal suit Marcus wore just hours ago hung loose on his frame, wrinkled and stained with the cold sweat of sheer panic. The most chilling sound was not the initial gasp that rippled through the front rows. It was the sharp, rhythmic clinking of heavy steel chains. Marcus walked down the aisle with his wrists bound tightly behind his back. The steel handcuffs caught the warm light of the tiered crystal chandeliers glinting with a cold, undeniable reality. The string quartet faltered, the lead cellist missing a note as the musicians stared at the spectacle unfolding before them. The music died away, leaving only the sound of heavy tactical boots and rattling chains echoing across the silent room. The elite crowd operates on a strict currency of optics and reputation. Loyalty in high society is an illusion that evaporates the moment a liability is introduced. The executives who had toasted Marcus the night before now recoiled, leaning away from the aisle as if his ruin were a contagious disease. Several veteran fund managers immediately reached for their encrypted phones, anticipating a massive sweep by the Securities and Exchange Commission. They knew a federal raid of this magnitude signaled systemic fraud, and they needed to insulate their own portfolios before the opening bell on Monday. The whisper started as a low hum and escalated into a frantic wave of judgment. Then the digital execution began. Hundreds of smartphones materialized from designer clutches and tailored pockets. The screens illuminated the dim ballroom, capturing the exact moment the arrogant groom was paraded like a captured fugitive. Flashes triggered in rapid succession. The influencers who attended to boost their own metrics recognized the viral potential of a billionaire downfall. They recorded his humiliation, broadcasting the federal arrest to millions of followers in real time. Marcus stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked in a hollow gaze. He was forced to walk past the very people he had spent his entire life trying to impress. He watched them transform from his peers into his digital executioners. The men who played golf with him at exclusive country clubs now looked at him with profound disgust. The women who praised his intellect now pointed phone cameras at his bound wrists. The social capital he had murdered his career to build vanished in the span of 50 feet. He was a dead man, walking down a white runner stripped of his title, his wealth, and his dignity. At the far end of the runner, standing beneath an archway of rare imported blooms, waited the bride. Vanessa wore a $50,000 silk gown tailored to project the image of untouchable royalty. Her sheer veil was pulled back, revealing a face frozen in profound horror. She watched the federal agents march her groom toward the altar. The reality of the steel handcuffs severed her final lifeline. She knew the arrest meant the state registry would remain unsigned today. The marriage certificate was dead. The legal shield of spousal privilege evaporated, leaving her exposed to the impending money laundering indictment. She did not mourn the loss of a romantic partner. She mourned the loss of her immunity. The phantom floral import business in Delaware and the Goas catering logistics firm in Nevada were now vulnerable to federal subpoenas. Without the marital privilege to shield her testimony, the Department of Justice would tear through her corporate veils in a matter of days. The calculated accomplice, who had demanded a bailout upstairs, realized she was out of moves. Her knees buckled under the weight of her own impending doom. She did not faint with theatrical grace. She collapsed onto the hard marble floor, the heavy silk of her gown pooling around her like a deflated parachute. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably amidst the scattered petals while the federal agents guided her groom out the side service exit. I stood in the shadows near the back of the ballroom, observing the wreckage. I wore my tailored charcoal suit, blending into the dark mahogany paneling. The federal raid was executed flawlessly. The toxic parasite was extracted from my property. The elite guests remained frozen in their seats, unsure if they should leave or wait for an explanation. The silence in the room stretched thick and suffocating. Then a sharp, angry voice shattered the quiet. David and Cynthia had watched their golden ticket walk out the door in chains. The $10 million payout they envisioned vanished into thin air. The royal lifestyle they craved for their favorite daughter was replaced by a looming criminal investigation. A rational parent would ask what crimes the groom committed to warrant a raid by the Financial Crimes Division. A toxic parent requires a scapegoat to process their own failure. They refuse to acknowledge the rot in their own foundation. My parents spotted me, standing near the entrance. They did not care about the hundreds of guests watching. They stormed down the aisle, their faces flushed with irrational fury. Cynthia pointed a trembling finger at my face, her eyes wide with untamed anger. Her designer dress rustled as she closed the distance between us. "You did this!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You orchestrated this entire spectacle just to ruin her life. You are a monster, Harper." David stepped forward, his chest puffed out, attempting to project a hollow authority. He ignored the reality of the federal raid and focused entirely on the shattered optics of his family. "We are done with you," David declared, his tone dripping with venom. "You are no longer a part of this family. We disown you right here and now. You are nothing but a jealous, bitter woman who could not stand to see her sister shine." He stepped closer, invading my personal space, jabbing a finger toward my chest. He operated under the delusion that he still possessed social standing and financial leverage. "You think you can humiliate us in front of the entire city and walk away clean?" He threatened, his voice shaking with desperate rage. "I am calling my attorneys the moment I leave this building. We are filing a civil lawsuit against you for $500,000. I will sue you for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I will prove you weaponized your hotel security to fabricate a federal arrest just to destroy my daughter's wedding. I will drag your name through the courts until you pay for what you did today." The echoing threats of a civil lawsuit hung in the air of the grand ballroom. David stood inches from my face, his chest heaving, his hands balled into tight fists. He expected me to flinch. He expected the young girl he had marginalized and sent to scrub the kitchen floors to resurface and apologize for ruining his high society spectacle. He believed the threat of disownment carried actual emotional weight. He failed to comprehend that a bond must exist before it can be broken. You cannot disown a woman who walked away from your toxic architecture a decade ago. I did not take a step back. I did not raise my voice to match his irrational fury. I looked at his flushed face and offered a cold, satisfied smile. The expression unnerved him. His bravado faltered for a fraction of a second as he realized his parental authority possessed zero currency in this room. A civil lawsuit requires a plaintiff with clean hands. "David," I said, keeping my tone even and surgical, "you claim I orchestrated a federal raid to intentionally inflict emotional distress. You want to drag my name through the courts? I think the courts are going to be very interested in your recent legal filings." I raised my right hand and offered a subtle gesture toward the shadows near the ballroom entrance. My lead corporate attorney stepped into the light. He wore a pristine navy suit and carried the quiet, lethal demeanor of a man who dismantled rival conglomerates for a living. He did not introduce himself. He walked directly toward David, holding a clear plastic evidence bag in his right hand. The attorney stopped beside me and extended his arm, placing the plastic bag directly into my father's hands. David looked down. Inside the transparent seal rested a thick sheet of heavy legal parchment. It was the exact sworn affidavit Marcus had brandished in the subterranean wine cellar earlier that evening. The document contained the fabricated narrative claiming David provided the seed capital for the hotel holding company. At the bottom of the page, resting above the embossed notary stamp, was his unmistakable signature. "You signed a document claiming you owned 51% of my empire." I explained my word striking with the precision of a scalpel. "You conspired with an investment banker to freeze my corporate operating accounts and execute a hostile takeover on the eve of my initial public offering. You intended to steal my life work to fund the vanity of your favorite daughter." David stared at his own signature through the plastic. His jaw tightened. The anger in his eyes morphed into the dawning realization of a fatal miscalculation. Cynthia leaned over his shoulder, her breathing shallow as she recognized the fraudulent paperwork. "You think corporate equity is a game of bluffing?" I continued, stripping away their aristocratic facade. "You assumed Marcus would file that paper on Monday morning and secure your $10 million payout. But Marcus is currently sitting in the back of a federal transport vehicle, facing decades in a penitentiary. And I intercepted his leverage." I took a single step forward, forcing David to look up from the evidence bag. "Signing a fraudulent affidavit with the explicit intent to seize corporate assets is not a simple misunderstanding, David." I delivered the brutal legal reality without a shred of sympathy. It constitutes felony perjury and conspiracy to commit federal fraud. He opened his mouth to speak, to formulate a defense or shift the blame, but I did not afford him the luxury of a rebuttal. "An hour ago, while you were mingling with your high society friends and drinking my vintage champagne, my legal team transmitted a comprehensive data packet to the Department of Justice," I revealed. "We provided them with the original digital metadata of my hotel incorporation. The immutable ledgers prove every cent of the seed capital originated from my offshore private equity funds. We then provided them with a scanned copy of that forged affidavit. You handed the federal prosecutors a signed confession of attempted corporate theft." The color vanished from my father's face. His posture collapsed. The man who just threatened to sue me for $500,000 realized he was standing on the precipice of a federal indictment. The federal government operates with extreme prejudice when high-level financial fraud is detected. Tay explained, mapping the exact parameters of their ruin. They do not send a warning letter. They deploy automated algorithms to secure the assets of the conspirators. Cynthia let out a soft, choked gasp, taking a stumbling step backward. The state executed a hard freeze on your entire financial portfolio. 30 minutes ago, I stated watching their pristine world burn to ash. Your retirement pensions are locked under a criminal investigation hold. Your joint checking accounts are frozen. The premium life insurance policies you intended to borrow against are suspended. You are legally severed from your wealth, pending a comprehensive federal audit. I looked at the plastic evidence bag resting in his trembling hands. You threatened to hire an expensive litigation firm to sue me. I noted a sharp edge of irony slicing through my tone. You cannot even afford to pay a retainer fee. You do not possess the liquid currency to cover your upcoming country club dues or your luxury car leases. Your credit cards will decline at the grocery store. You do not even have enough cash to pay for a taxi ride back to your colonial estate. You are destitute. David stood paralyzed, clutching the plastic bag. The ultimate weapon he thought he possessed, his status, his wealth, his parental authority, was eradicated. He was a man accustomed to leveraging money to escape consequences. Now he faced the crushing reality of systemic poverty and a looming criminal trial. Cynthia covered her mouth, weeping silent tears of genuine terror. They were neutralized, trapped in the financial wasteland they had tried to push me into. I turned my back on them, closing the ledger on my toxic family history. I intended to walk out of the ballroom and return to the penthouse to prepare for the Monday morning market opening. The corporate war was won, but the architecture of a crisis demands that every unpaid debt is eventually collected. The heavy oak doors at the back of the grand ballroom burst open for a third time. It was not a tactical squad of federal agents, nor was it a team of corporate lawyers. It was the working class demanding their due. The elite guests who had lingered to watch the familial destruction murmured in confusion as a dozen individuals marched down the pristine white runner. Leading the group was the executive wedding planner holding a thick binder of printed invoices. Behind her walked the head florist, the catering director, the lighting technician, and the string quartet manager. They did not wear designer suits or couture gowns. They wore the frustrated, exhausted expressions of business owners who had just realized they were the victims of a massive financial illusion. They bypassed me and ignored my ruined parents. The group marched directly toward the altar where Vanessa still knelt on the marble floor, surrounded by scattered white orchids. The wedding planner did not offer words of comfort for the weeping bride. She stopped in front of Vanessa and dropped the heavy binder onto the floor. It landed with a sharp, echoing thud. Every single cashier check your groom issued to our vendors just bounced, the wedding planner declared, her voice projecting across the silent ballroom. Vanessa slowly raised her head, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She looked at the circle of angry vendors surrounding her. The catering director stepped forward, holding a digital tablet. The banking network rejected the electronic transfers 20 minutes ago. He stated, his tone hard and unforgiving. My supply chain is compromised. You owe me $80,000 for the caviar and the imported champagne alone. I want a valid credit card right now, or I am calling the local authorities to report theft of services. The head florist chimed in, waving a stack of unpaid bills. The floral archways, the centerpieces, the custom bouquets. Another $60,000. The routing numbers Marcus provided are locked under a federal anti-money laundering hold. Vanessa scrambled backward, pushing herself away from the vendors. Her $50,000 silk gown caught on the sharp heel of her designer shoe, tearing the delicate fabric. She pressed her back against the wooden altar structure, trapped like a cornered animal. I do not have the money, she stammered, her voice cracking. The accounts are frozen. Marcus took the phones. You have to wait. My sponsors will cover the deficit. I will call my brand managers. She reached into the folds of her ruined dress and extracted her backup mobile device. She unlocked the screen, intending to dial her public relations agent to secure an emergency cash advance. As the screen illuminated, the device began to vibrate violently. A cascade of urgent notifications flooded the interface. The digital execution Marcus had predicted earlier was unfolding with lethal speed. The guests in the ballroom had already uploaded the high-definition footage of the groom being paraded in steel handcuffs. The videos spread across social media platforms like a digital wildfire. The internet dissected the federal raid, analyzing the presence of the Financial Crimes Division. The optics of a prominent influencer marrying a federal fugitive triggered an immediate corporate panic. Vanessa stared at the incoming emails. The subject lines were stark and unforgiving. Her primary cosmetics sponsor issued a formal termination of contract, citing a violation of the morality clause. The luxury lifestyle network that hosted her content suspended her channel pending an internal review. 3 separate fashion brands demanded the immediate return of their loaned jewelry and apparel. The corporate sponsors did not offer a lifeline. They severed all ties, issuing public statements to distance their brands from the money laundering scandal. Her lucrative endorsement revenue, her only source of independent income, evaporated in the span of 3 minutes. She dropped the phone. It clattered against the marble floor, the screen cracking under the impact. The vendors stepped closer, forming an impenetrable wall around the altar. They did not care about her lost sponsorships or her ruined digital empire. They wanted their money. The invoices totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars. With her groom in a federal cell, her parents financially annihilated, and her brand permanently destroyed, Vanessa was buried in insurmountable debt. The woman who had built her entire identity on the illusion of limitless wealth was now drowning in the very liabilities she helped create. Downstairs on the bustling Manhattan street, the tactical squad escorted Marcus through the revolving glass doors. He did not struggle. The fight was drained from his posture, leaving a hollow shell of a man. The federal agents patted him down against the side of the armored transport, removing his designer belt and his expensive silk tie. The heavy steel doors of the vehicle slid open, revealing a dark utilitarian interior. He stepped inside the metal cage. The doors slammed shut, echoing with a harsh metallic finality. The Ivy League prodigy who spent his career exploiting the vulnerable and weaponizing stolen capital was now a federal inmate. His vast intellect and his tailored suits offered zero protection against the immutable laws of financial compliance. Miles away in a stark downtown precinct, his mother faced her own bleak reality. Patricia sat on a rigid metal bench inside a holding cell. The tweed jacket she wore to project generational wealth was confiscated. The heavy makeup she applied to feign distress was washed away, leaving her looking frail and unremarkable. She waited for a bail hearing she could no longer afford. Her underground gambling debts remained unpaid, and her country club associates ignored her desperate phone calls. The aristocratic facade she spent decades cultivating shattered in a matter of hours, exposing the pathetic, desperate core beneath. Back in the grand ballroom, the architecture of my toxic family crumbled into dust. David and Cynthia remained frozen near the back wall. The aristocratic posture they had maintained for 30 years dissolved. My father stared blankly at the intricate patterns woven into the carpet. His mind struggled to process the total evaporation of his commercial real estate holdings, his retirement accounts, and his social leverage. He held the plastic evidence bag containing his forged signature like a live grenade. My mother clutched her imported silk shawl, shivering uncontrollably despite the ambient warmth of the room. They possessed no remaining collateral. They held no social currency. The elite guests they invited to witness their triumph filed past them, avoiding eye contact, eager to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of a federal raid. David and Cynthia were bankrupt ghosts, haunting a room full of people who were already deleting their phone numbers. I turned my attention away from my parents and looked toward the front of the room. The altar was a ruin of high society ambition. The ring of frustrated business owners still surrounded the bride, demanding immediate payment for services she could never afford. The florists, the caterers, and the event planners formed a tight, unyielding perimeter. I walked slowly down the center aisle, stepping onto the pristine white runner. The fabric was scuffed by tactical boots and stained by spilled champagne. I moved with a measured, deliberate pace. The sound of my heels striking the marble floor cut through the chaotic demands of the vendors. As I approached the altar, the business owners stepped back, parting in silence to form a narrow path. They recognized the hierarchy of the room. They understood who held the ledger and who controlled the cash flow of the building. Vanessa knelt on the hard stone, surrounded by a sea of wilting, imported white orchids. Her breathing was ragged and shallow. The $50,000 silk gown she demanded for her grand debut was torn at the hem, the delicate French lace snagged and ruined by her own frantic movements. Her heavy theatrical makeup ran in dark streaks down her pale cheeks, staining the expensive fabric. The cracked smartphone displaying the terminated sponsorship emails lay discarded near her knees. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a primal, desperate terror. She was drowning in an ocean of debt, facing a federal indictment and abandoned by the man she conspired to protect. I stopped 2 feet away from her. I did not raise my voice to compete with the lingering murmurs of the vendors. I did not gloat over her destruction. Gloating is a mechanism for the insecure, a tactic used by those who need external validation. I stood in my tailored charcoal suit, projecting quiet, immovable authority. The vendors require their capital. Vanessa, I said, delivering the financial reality with surgical precision. The beluga caviar, the vintage champagne, the sprawling floral arches, and the lighting rigs. Your outstanding liabilities total $380,000. Your primary accounts are locked under a federal anti-money laundering hold. Your corporate sponsors canceled your endorsement contracts. Your brand is now classified as a toxic asset. You possess zero liquidity to settle these invoices. She opened her mouth to argue, to demand a solution, but her throat yielded only a dry, breathless rasp. The catering director threatened to call the local authorities to report theft of services. I continued outlining the architecture of her impending doom. That is a minor local misdemeanor. It pales in comparison to the federal subpoenas currently being drafted. The Department of Justice will trace the stolen pension funds directly to the ghost shell companies you registered in Delaware and Nevada. They will pierce the corporate veil. They will find your signature on the fraudulent invoices. You washed the stolen currency. You lack the legal shield of spousal privilege. The federal prosecutors will offer you a plea deal if you cooperate, but you will still face a mandatory minimum of 5 years in a federal penitentiary for active conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Vanessa shook her head side to side, a pathetic mechanical denial of her own actions. "Please, Harper," she whispered, her voice breaking into a fragile sob. "Do not let them put me in a concrete cell. I will do anything. You own the hotel. You own the bank. You have the capital to pay these people. Please pay the vendors. I will disappear. I will delete my social media channels. I will never bother you again. Just write the check." She still viewed me as a familial safety net, an endless reservoir of capital she could tap to erase her mistakes. She spent her life believing consequences were meant for other people. She failed to realize that every financial rescue requires a binding contract and a brutal exchange of equity. I reached into the deep pocket of my suit jacket. I extracted a thick, folded stack of coarse fabric. I held it in my hand, feeling the rough, unyielding texture of the material. "I will authorize my Treasury Department to issue certified cashier checks to every vendor in this room," I stated. "I will settle your $380,000 wedding deficit today. Furthermore, my corporate legal division will intervene with the federal prosecutors on your behalf. We will negotiate a non-custodial plea agreement regarding your money laundering shell companies. You will surrender your passport and pay a severe federal fine, but you will not step foot inside a prison cell." Vanessa gasped, clasping her hands together in a gesture of profound relief. She closed her eyes, believing the nightmare was over. She assumed she had secured a miraculous, unconditional bailout from her older sister. But I do not write blank checks. I clarified my tone, dropping to a lethal, quiet register that demanded absolute attention. This is a corporate acquisition of your debt. You will sign an ironclad promissory note binding you to my holding company. You will repay every single dollar of the vendor invoices, the federal fines, and the legal retainers. Since your earning potential as a digital influencer is permanently eradicated, you will repay the debt through manual labor. I dropped the folded fabric directly at her feet. It hit the marble with a soft thud, landing squarely on the hem of her ruined silk gown. It was a drab gray housekeeping uniform, the exact same coarse apron I wore in the lobby just hours prior. "You will report to the subterranean service entrance at 4 in the morning tomorrow," I instructed, outlining the unyielding terms of her salvation. "You will clock in for a mandatory 10-hour shift. You will scrub the marble floors, polish the brass fixtures, and clean the toilets of the luxury suites on the top floor. A portion of your minimum wage will be garnished automatically to service your principal debt. You will push a heavy cleaning cart down these halls for the next 10 years of your life. If you miss a single scheduled shift or violate the strict behavioral clauses of the labor contract, my lawyers will void the plea agreement. The federal prosecutors will reinstate the wire fraud charges, and you will go to prison." Vanessa stared at this gray fabric resting on her torn designer dress. Her breathing stopped. The poetic justice of the arrangement paralyzed her mind. She was offered her freedom, but the price was an eternity of the exact manual labor she had mocked her entire life. She was trapped, bound to the hotel she tried to steal, serving the elite society that just discarded her. There were no cameras to filter her reality. There were no sponsors to fund her escape. I looked down at her ruined designer dress and the cheap gray cotton. The memory of the morning encounter flashed in my mind. The arrogant groom wiping his bespoke shoe with a linen napkin. The sneering bride laughing at the maid standing in the lobby. I leaned forward slightly, delivering the final devastating payoff without a trace of malice. "Learn your place," I said. The words hung in the quiet air, heavy and absolute. I turned my back on the sobbing bride, the ruined parents, and the scattered white orchids. I walked back down the white runner, leaving the wreckage of their high society delusion behind me. 6 months pass with the ruthless efficiency of a well-executed algorithm. The financial markets possess no memory for scandal once the balance sheets display record-breaking profits. The Monday morning following the disastrous wedding attempt, my holding company went public. The initial public offering did not merely meet the projected valuations outlined by the underwriters. It shattered them. Institutional investors flocked to a corporate chairman who demonstrated the surgical ability to neutralize internal threats without disrupting the daily supply chain. The stock price surged 30% in the first 4 hours of trading, establishing a new baseline for hospitality conglomerates. I secured my empire not through loud proclamations, but through quiet, undeniable leverage. My executive board operates with flawless precision. The staff of the Waldorf Astoria, from the executive chefs to the valet attendants, function with fierce loyalty because they know the chairman protects the foundation. I stand on the sprawling terrace of the top-floor penthouse, the cold night air biting at the lapels of my tailored jacket. I hold a crystal glass of aged scotch swirling the amber liquid as I look down at the glittering grid of Manhattan streets. It is a city built on predatory ambition and fragile egos, a landscape where predators disguise themselves in bespoke suits. 200 miles away, the man who attempted to steal this empire resides in a vastly different ecosystem. The federal justice system moves with a slow, crushing weight. Marcus did not secure a lenient plea arrangement. When the Financial Crimes Division unpacked the encrypted ledgers, I provided they uncovered a labyrinth of elder abuse and wire fraud, extending far beyond the initial $50,000 venue deposit. The federal judge handed down a 15-year sentence without the possibility of early parole. Marcus now resides in a high-security federal penitentiary in upstate New York. The bespoke charcoal suits and the custom leather loafers are gone, replaced by a rigid synthetic orange jumpsuit that offers no insulation against the damp concrete walls. The Ivy League pedigree that fueled his unearned arrogance holds zero currency inside those steel perimeters. The true poetry of his downfall lies in his daily labor assignment. The man who scoffed at the working class, who wiped his expensive shoe with a linen napkin and mocked the concept of manual labor, is now tasked with maintaining the sanitation of the cell block. Every morning, he fills a plastic bucket with harsh industrial bleach. He kneels on the rough concrete floors, scrubbing the stainless steel toilets of his fellow inmates. His hands are perpetually raw and blistered. His sharp intellect is confined to calculating the hours until his next designated meal. He thought he belonged at the apex of the financial food chain. He learned that gravity is an unforgiving force when the pedestal is kicked away. His mother shares a similar geographic isolation. Patricia pled guilty to felony insurance fraud to avoid a lengthy trial. She avoided a prison sentence due to her age, but the court-mandated restitution and the subsequent civil judgments liquidated her entire estate. The underground gambling syndicate seized whatever residual assets the federal prosecutors missed. She no longer walks the marble lobbies of luxury hotels demanding premium suite upgrades. She resides in a cramped efficiency studio in a dilapidated neighborhood. She works as a cashier at a discount retail pharmacy, spending her days scanning cheap cosmetics and bagging generic prescriptions. The high society women she spent decades trying to impress do not return her calls. They erased her contact information the moment the steel handcuffs clicked around her wrists in my lobby. Her aristocratic facade is a distant memory, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the endless scanning of barcodes. My parents discovered that social exile is a fate worse than physical incarceration for those addicted to status. The federal investigation into their fraudulent corporate affidavit concluded with a deferred prosecution agreement. They avoided jail time by surrendering their remaining financial assets to cover the investigative fines and legal retainers. The sprawling colonial estate with the manicured lawns and the heated swimming pool was seized and auctioned by the primary commercial mortgage holder. David and Cynthia now live in a 2-room subsidized apartment in a forgotten borough far from the country clubs and the charity galas. The walls of their new residence are thin and the paint peels in the corners. David spends his days sitting in a worn armchair, staring at a small television, unable to afford the premium news channels he once dominated. Cynthia drinks cheap boxed wine, mourning the loss of her diamond tennis bracelets and her imported silk scarves. They live in total silence. They do not speak of the billion-dollar empire they attempted to steal. They realize every day that their blind greed cost them their only tether to the world of wealth. They placed their final bet on the favorite daughter and lost everything. I do not send them checks. I do not return their letters. They are redacted from my ledger permanently. The most intricate execution of justice unfolds directly beneath my feet, inside the walls of the Waldorf Astoria. Vanessa signed the ironclad labor contract to avoid a federal indictment for money laundering. She is legally bound to this property for the next decade. Her alarm clock rings at 3 a.m. She navigates the subway system in the dark, arriving at the subterranean service entrance an hour before sunrise. She steps into the employee locker room and strips off her street clothes. She puts on the drab gray housekeeping uniform. The coarse fabric offers no comfort. She ties the gray apron around her waist and pins her hair back, clipping the plastic employee badge to her collar. She grips the heavy metal handle of a loaded cleaning cart, pushing it down the long, silent corridors. The physical toll is relentless. The heavy vacuum cleaners, the endless polishing of brass fixtures, the harsh chemicals drying out her skin. But the psychological toll is a masterpiece of self-inflicted torture. The digital influencer community is ruthless. When the news of her labor contract leaked, her former friends did not offer sympathy. They recognized a viral opportunity. The same lifestyle bloggers and socialites who used to attend her lavish parties now routinely book the presidential suite and the premium penthouses. They request Vanessa by name. They intentionally spill coffee on the imported rugs. They leave discarded towels strewn across the marble bathrooms. They sit on the plush velvet sofas sipping champagne while my sister kneels on the floor scrubbing their bathtubs. They pull out their smartphones, recording her humiliation, uploading the footage to the very platforms she once ruled. Vanessa cannot shout at them. She cannot break a glass or throw a tantrum. If she violates the behavioral clauses of her employment contract, my legal team will void her immunity deal, and the federal prosecutors will reinstate the felony charges. She must keep her head down, answer politely, and scrub the tile. The memory of the $50,000 wedding gown is a ghost haunting her every time she looks down at the drab gray cotton. I take another sip of the scotch, letting the warmth travel down my throat. The city lights stretch out below me, a vast grid of opportunity and consequence. The gray maid uniform was never a symbol of low status. The arrogant fools who walked through my lobby perceived it as a mark of servitude. They failed to realize it was my armor. It granted me the ultimate tactical advantage of invisibility. It allowed me to stand in the center of the battlefield, observing the exact geometry of my enemies without triggering their defenses. They underestimated the woman holding the sponge, failing to recognize the architect who owned the marble. True power does not announce itself. It does not require a flashy bespoke suit, a viral social media post, or a loud monologue in a crowded room. True power is the quiet, unyielding ownership of the foundation your enemies choose to walk upon. If you love seeing arrogant villains destroyed by absolute corporate brilliance, hit like and subscribe to Silent Vengeance Stories.